is Jesus saying, in effect, I'm going to take Satan's domain where he lives, the Lord of the dead, and I'm going to turn it into his own tomb. I'm going to empty the place out. And I have a lot to say about this in Unseen Realms, so I'm not going to rehearse all the content here. But this is Peter's confession. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, and we'll look at where that is geographically in a moment, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, one of the prophets. I mean, everybody's guessing. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell, again, if you hover over ESV, it has a little note there, gates of Hades, this is the underworld, shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth, so you bind in heaven. Binding and loosing is actually a reference to exorcism. I spent a whole episode of my podcast on that. If you want to get into that content, you can just listen to the podcast. But let's go back here. What we have here is a location of Caesarea Philippi. It's known later, I mean, it's known by a number of names where the confession, the Peter Rock, passage occurs. It's also known as Banyas or Panias, the Grotto of Pan, later on in Jesus' day. This references to my book on demons. It's associated with Baal in the Old Testament. Adjacent to this, there was a Baal cult. Baal is Lord of the dead, the underworld. This is Baal's role in Canaanite religion. So you have a matrix of ideas here. You also have, Bashan is actually an important term. Let me just show you a map here. We'll get into some of this material a little bit later in other sessions of the class, so I don't want to skip ahead too far. But here's Caesarea Philippi at the top. This is where this scene occurs, also known as Banyas or Panias. You'll notice, again, Galilee, this is upper and lower Galilee on this side. On this side, this whole region, actually going down, it includes Edrei and Ashtaroth, is not on this map, but this whole region is Bashan in the Old Testament. Okay, here's Ashtaroth, Edrei, Sea of Galilee. This map, let's go back to the first map. Here's Sea of Galilee, here's Edrei. We go down a little bit, Ashtaroth, Edrei. This is all part of Bashan, okay, in the Old Testament. This is the region where Joshua and Moses went up on the other side of the Jordan, heading to Bashan to what? To get rid of the last vestiges of the giant clans in that area, the Rephaim. This is their turf, or was their turf in the Old Testament. So if you take a look at this, Caesarea Philippi, there's the rock. Okay, when Jesus is standing in this place and he says, you're Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. This is the Grotto of Pan. This is Banyas, Panias. Okay, this is, in their thinking, both in the Canaanite world, Ashtaroth and Edrei were gateways to the netherworld. This is, again, adjacent to a cult of Baal, the god of the underworld. This is what he's talking. It's hard to miss the rock. Okay, if you're standing there, upon this rock I will build my church. Basically Jesus saying, I'm going to reverse death. I'm going to be the cure for death. I'm going to turn Satan's dominion, the Lord of the dead. Baal-Zebul, the New Testament term for Satan, it means Prince Baal. Baal-Zebul. He is God of the dead, Lord of the dead. This is why Baal, becomes a Satan figure, because Satan, as the result of his rebellion, is Lord of the dead. Everything dies. Everything winds up on his doorstep, as it were. And Jesus is saying, well, I'm here to preach the kingdom of God, and upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. And the gates of hell are not going to be able to withstand it. Now, you might have noticed the subtle difference in my translation there. And I'll show you why here. Because this is the place, upon this rock. Again, it's hard to miss. Now, ESV has the gates of hell or Hades shall not prevail against it. This is a screenshot from the interlinear that I use in Logos. You'll notice against has no, right here, against it, it has no Greek word. That means in the English translation, against it isn't really based on the Greek text. There is no preposition here that means against. That's a translator attempt to capture what's in the Greek. Rather, there's a better way to translate this. And that is, the gates of hell will not be able to withstand it. The verb used there, stand against, it can also be withstand, and then you don't need the preposition. The gates of hell will not be able to withstand it. And so what you have here is Jesus saying, in effect, I'm going to take Satan's domain where he lives. The Lord of the dead, and I'm going to turn it into his own tomb. I'm going to empty the place out. And if you were faithful to Yahweh in the Old Testament, you are not, you're going to be delivered from death. Okay, this is your reward. You're going to be delivered from death. If you're a follower of me, because I am Yahweh incarnate, and you align yourself with me, your believing loyalty is with me, you will not have everlasting death. You're not going to be in the realm of the dead. The curse of death is reversed for you. And he goes to the gates of the underworld in his ministry in Bashan, which, as we'll find out in a later session, was also associated with serpents, place of the serpent. He goes to Bashan, which is already associated with the underworld and Baal and Zeus and Pan and all these, these other deities, and says, it's going to be right here, right on top of the underworld. I'm going to overturn, I'm going to bury the underworld. I'm going to nullify it. I'm going to reverse it. He picks this place to say these things. And so it's significant. The conversation is significant against the backdrop that the disciples have in their head about this place. They know what it is. They know its history, both Old Testament and more recent. And Jesus takes them to this place to have this conversation because he's the one who provokes it. Who do men say that I am? And then, they get a few answers. And who do you think I am? And Peter says, thou art, you're the son of the living God, which is significant as well. I mean, if we could rabbit trail on this too. John at one point, Jesus gets into a debate with the Sadducees who deny the resurrection. They want to know, they ask him some stupid question about, a woman gets divorced 7 times, like whose wife is she? Basically to make fun of the resurrection talk. And Jesus looks at them and says, you do err not knowing the
He totally ruins it from there on. So let me share this. I just disagree with him. I don't think Matthew 22 regarding that story of the, in fact, I think it says the opposite. I'll probably pull that up next, but he's saying in the resurrection, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are alive. All right, let's see. This is the ESV. Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. So my contention is Jesus is promising that he has to leave to heaven and build the house. It's a Jewish wedding picture here. And he promises to come back for his people. Kind of parallels with the verse that says he'll bring with him those who have fallen asleep. I think the context shows that he's talking about that verse, whatever you believe about the intermediate state, it does mean he's taking them back to heaven. Even people who disagree with my opinion on the state of the dead would say that that verse is saying the Lord will bring with him those who have fallen asleep is regarding taking them back to heaven. Just like I would say this is too. People argue that this isn't saying isn't referring to the rapture when he promises to come back to take them to be with him. Well, then there's a problem then, because Paul says, right, that when he returns, we'll meet him in the air. So, and then that's the rapture. So what do you think, CJ?
Yeah, I don't have necessarily any sort of a issue with that explanation. I've always kind of seen, the marriage imagery is pretty on the nose, honestly. So I certainly agree with that aspect of it. I think there's also some elements of like Sukkot imagery, which is the harvest festival, Jewish harvest festival.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I know you have probably a different schema than I do, but where do you apply this verse to, you think? Is he talking to believers or Jews or Christians or whoever or everybody or what?
Well, let's see. I'm on my phone, so I can't really read it.
It's John 14, that's like the verse every Adventist like memorizes.
Yeah.
Believe Jesus promises when he promises them that he has to leave and build in his Father's house are many mansions, and you know where I'm going. And then Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Anyways, and he says, show us the Father, and it's enough. And then he says, how long have you been with me? And you still don't know me, Philip? Whoever's seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I'm in the Father, the Father is in me? Anyway, what do you make of this idea? I was always taught that regarding when it says, upon this rock I'll build my church, I was always taught that he was talking about himself or whatever, but I think that's still the case, because he's literally talking. If you take this interpretation where he's talking about this imagery about like defeating hell and death, which I love, by the way, it still is regarding himself, because it's him who conquers death in his resurrection. So it kind of actually still holds to that point. And I think it's even a better refutation of the Catholic, because they can't make it directly about the person or Peter. It's more about a non-person, in the sense of the analogy he makes or whatever with the words, but then that still manages to refer to what his work. So I like it.
Yeah, I've heard a couple different explanations that I think are good. I do like the explanation of it, this rock being Jesus himself. It seems to me like if you take it in context, it's a little bit more specific than that. Jesus says, thou art Peter, and on this Petros will I build my church. Which first, it does seem like a little bit of a preempted polemic against the Catholics who don't yet exist. Because what he's literally saying is, you are Petra, pebble, right? This little one, or whichever one I can't remember which one it actually is that is pebble, but the one he applies to Peter is pebble, small rock, right? And then on this big rock will I build my church, right? So he almost is like specifically downgrading Peter and then upgrading this rock. What is this rock, right? And it seems to me like if you go just a little bit earlier, right, and he's talking about, I tell you, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who art in heaven. And then he says, and thou art Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And so it seems to me like the revelation of who Christ is the rock, right? It's not just Christ himself per se, although it is Christ himself. That's of course that is the rock that's built on the church, right? Or that the church is built on, excuse me. But it's a little bit more specific than that too, right? It's like the revelation of who exactly Jesus Christ is, not just a guy. We weren't just founded. This wasn't a religion just founded by some dude. It's the revelation of who that quote dude, that absolutely awesome omnipotent being actually was, and that is the Son of God, the Almighty himself, right?
Right. It is interesting here what happens about to Peter too, right? In the context here, it says, so then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense to me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. If any man come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So that's literally what happens right after that story. So after he gives Peter the keys to the kingdom,
Right. Well, and it is interesting. The keys to the kingdom bit is also done to all of the apostles in unison. So that's another way you can refute the Roman Catholic claims there. But well, I guess I don't have a but there. Anyways,
I don't have a butt either. My pants practically fall off. No. So did you didn't get a chance to look at that other verse? I'm not really prepared with anything, but I think well, here I'll pull up this article where I got it from here. This is interesting. This is from Peter Van Inwagen, who's a Christian, of course, but he's more of a philosopher, right? I think he's an open.
Oop, looks like we lost Senior Jamie. Yeah, I would hope. I think he is an open theist, because I think, if I remember correctly, he's the one who you brought in, or not you brought in, but you had like brought up a video about him when Danny was in here, and I was talking about like, hey, this guy sounds like he might be an open theist, and then Danny said, yeah, he definitely is. That's like my experience with Peter Van der Wagen right there, if I'm remembering the same person, that is. You still there? I don't know if that's just me or not. I'll jump out real quick and jump back in.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear
I
me?
can, yeah.
Okay, good. Maybe it's because it happened when I was trying to share the screen here with this paper. Maybe it's a problem. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I definitely can.
Okay. I'm just curious what you think about this. This is something he's writing about. He's talking about, he's very fair to the duelists, more fair than I would be to you filthy duelists. No, let us now turn to the New Testament. I shall discuss both what I consider to be the general tendency of the New Testament and two passages that are sometimes used as proof texts by duelists. The New Testament is not a textbook of metaphysics. Nevertheless, the book, I love the way this guy writes, though. Nevertheless, not necessarily right here, but book of the New Testament, unlike the books of the Old, were composed in a world which metaphysics was very much in the air, and there are passages that reflect this. It was the Greek proclivity to metaphysical speculation, I suppose, that was responsible for the celebrated and difficult passage in 1 Corinthians on, as we might say, the specifics of the resurrection of the dead. But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? What kind of body do they come? You foolish man! Paul's exasperation is evident, but he does not shirk the question. And it seems to me his answer provides the single passage in the New Testament that is directly addressed to philosophical worries about resurrection. Let us look at what Paul says, and let us not be bound by the conventions of New Testament translation, which make use of terms that are for us associated with all sorts of ideas that were not present in Paul's mind, or at least I should like to see some argument before I granted that they were. So here's the passage: "What you sow will not be made." So he puts some of the words for particular reason back into the original language to help distinguish, because there's translations where the English takes liberty to change the word, even though it's the same word in this section of scripture of 1 Corinthians 15, I think 36 through 45 or something. So just notice, like, soma is body, right, normally, and so that's all that is here. So what you sow will not be made alive unless it die, and what you sow is not the soma that will be, soma being body, but a naked kernel, as it may be of wheat or some other kind, but God gives it a soma as he wished, to each seed or sperma its own soma. Not all flesh is the same, for human beings have one flesh, and beasts have another flesh, birds another, fish still another. So also the resurrection of the dead. What is sown in corruption and raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor and is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a suke soma, or the word for soul. So the word for, he put psychic for some weird reason here, so he actually translated it as his own way, but it is sown a suke soma, or soulish body, or soul body. I think it's sukinois or whatever, sukinos, I don't know how to say it. It is raised a pneumatic soma, so a spiritual body. Just, if there's a psychic soma, there's also a pneumatic soma. So also it is written, the first human being, Adam, became a living suke. The final Adam became a life-giving pneuma. So it literally says Adam is a living soul, and it doesn't translate it that way, though. And the final Adam, or Christ, became a life-giving spirit, which it does translate spirit, the pneuma there. So it literally says your soul body is sown into the ground, and in your body that's raised is the same body, but it's a spirit body. Did you know that? It said it that way? That's kind of weird.
I guess I'm not 100% sure if I did, to be honest.
Yeah, because it says, like, yes, maybe that, this is one of those translational things too that's kind of interesting, because this is where, like, most people would be like, well, why would they translate it like that? And it's like, well, context can determine stuff. So, like, I'm not totally sold that this proves anything necessarily, but Paul does use the language he uses for soul and spirit there in other places. So he's literally, but I think he's just trying to make this connection, right? He's thinking about what it says in Genesis, obviously, because he's talking about the body of Adam, right? And you see that in his other writings. He's talking about this the old man, the flesh, quote unquote, man, and then the spirit person is like the one in Christ, right? Who he makes your spirit alive in the spirit. And so that language is clearly just he's just trying to describe Adam, and he's thinking about how Adam was created, right? So although it's interesting that distinction though, because he's using the language of Adam before he sins, of course, but I think he just has in mind Adam and making a distinction, because that's how he ends that part, right? With Christ is the life, quickens the spirit, and he's the life-giving spirit that brings life. And I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what he's trying to say about that, I guess. But I think when you see that language and like how they overlap with the Old Testament language, because there's other places where it just says suke. I think he says it here in the next part of this article. I'll skip ahead to not drag this on too long, but he makes some pretty good points here. Human being alive with old life that comes to us from Adam. If Paul had wanted to talk of the soul in anything like the Platonic sense, we may wonder why he would use the only word available for expressing that sense with an entirely different meaning. I would contend similarly that Paul used the adjective I have represented by the word psychic to mean alive with old Adamic life, and that he used the word pneuma, spirit, to mean a human being who's alive with the new resurrection life. And so similarly for the adjective I have represented by the word pneumatic, which is spirit. A note on the word soma. I have no real... Okay, I'll skip that. Let's see what he says here. This is interesting. Oh, yeah, this is where in Mark 16, or Matthew 16, or Mark 8, for whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake shall find it. For what will someone be profited if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will anyone give in exchange for his soul? That's usually how it's translated, but did you know that every single time when it's referring to the person's life or soul, it's just the word suke? Whoever wishes to save his soul will lose it, but whoever loses his soul for my sake will find it. For what will someone be profited if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will anyone give in exchange for his soul? So they even, the word is just, I don't know what made them decide to use life, the word life, and when to use soul, but it's not always a distinction in the Greek.
Well, it's something that would have to be determined by, I think, more than likely the context of, first off the thematic context, and then second off linguistic context, because I'm ignorant on Greek, and I'm less ignorant on Hebrew, but I don't want people to get the impression that I'm some flawless Hebrew speaker. But I can just relate it better to Hebrew. But like, for example, Shemayim can be variously translated as skies or as heavens, right? And I think there's even some other ones that I might be missing here, but those are two different, variations of the same word because they only use the one word. Or the, excuse me, I'm trying to think of a good one here, but my brain is still, I guess, a little bit foggy from sick. Shoot, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on here. I've used examples like this before, but the point is just that sometimes they have different words for different sort of things.
Sure.
Their vocabulary. Right?
Idea.
English has Sorry.
No, you're okay. I know what you're saying. But think about reading this in the Greek, like in the original Greek text, if you're a Greek speaker and that's all that you had, like it just says suke in the same form in all four places there. So like, how would you know, what kind of distinction would it make in the context? I'm trying to think of how I don't know. I guess I'd have to know more about Greek, I suppose, to be sure about that. But it's also
because I'm sure it's something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm sure it's something that's probably just, probably has a lot to do with just the context of the individual. And actually, here's a better example than the one I just gave, but it's for Hebrew, right? Is Eretz, right? Eretz could be like Eretz Yisrael, which is the land of Israel, right? That's now you're talking about a geographical location. And if you are talking about that at the beginning of the sentence, and then you just say Ha Eretz, it could be understood that you're just talking about that same land, right? Even though you've dropped the moniker of Israel. But you could also say ha'eretz as in the actual dirt underneath your feet, like the ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we
And
use the word the same today, right?
yeah, exactly. And in that same note, if you're a Jew today, Earth, the planet, is Eretz, right? So it can be the dirt, it can be the ground, it can be the planet, it can be a geographical location. And the only way you know the difference is just by looking at the context of the sentence and what the writer's trying to communicate and everything like that. And it's no different than English. It's a little different in one sense, which is that English has 175,000 plus words. So we tend to use redundant words a little bit less. In fact, we have a different kind of redundancy. We have 6 different words for the exact same thing. Um, but, we still do that kind of same thing. Like, for example, back in my day versus one day versus the other day versus day 2, right? The context dictates that some of those are ages, some of those are general time frames, some of those are a general day that exists in the future, or even a cardinal day. But it's all the same word, right?
Yeah. This is kind of inverted though, because in the original language it's the same word, and then in the English they decide to use 2 different words for it in context here. What do you mean? I'm an idiot, Spirit, but Smokey, come in. Spirit body. What do you mean, spirit body? You're an idiot, Jamie. No, I don't think so. I think a spiritual body is the new body that you get. It's the glorified body. That's what I think it means. So if that's stupid, then call me stupid. So can you see the screen there, CJ? No, it's too small.
Yeah.
So when he says, I could kind of see, like, it's kind of makes sense to say whoever wishes to save, because he's kind of talking like in your present tense, or the application would be like present tense. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. And I always wondered how to understand that from a eternal security point of view. Like, whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. It almost sounds like but whoever loses his life for my sake shall find it. So you have to like lose your life. What does that mean? Seems like that's a tall order.
Well, there's always some level of death in the Christian experience, whether it's only the metaphorical death. I don't tend to like those, like Justin Peters has said before, if you're not persecuted, you're not a real Christian, because Jesus said you will have persecution. It's like, that's just absolute nonsense, because Justin Peters, you've never been persecuted, so don't stop pretending like you have, right?
I guess royals can't be Christians then.
No, I know, right? It's an absurd statement. It's now, of course, there's a truth behind the statement, just really quickly, which is that he is trying to point out that a Christian shouldn't be real, like, cozy with
Passive.
things we would consider to be worldly. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But nonetheless, just to say, I'm not like one of those kinds of people who would say that you necessarily have to be droll and persecuted and in the dirt and poor and all that kind of stuff in order to be a Christian. But there is at least some. What up?
Go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say there is at least some death for every single Christian in a metaphorical sense, meaning that, let's say that Paul wanted to go take a trip to Asia Minor, right? And perhaps he was told by Jesus through the Holy Spirit that you don't go to Asia Minor. I want to send you somewhere else. Well, because Paul has died to himself, and I deliberately chose an actual example there, although I don't think it was Asia Minor that he was prevented from going to. I think it might have been Spain. But regardless, because you have died to yourself, your aspirations here don't really matter, right? You do whatever it is that God wants you to do. And that's obviously like a small example of that. But the point just being that Paul, the person, and his wills and his aspirations and all that kind of stuff, they don't really matter. But at the same time, obviously, some of them did actually end up being fulfillments of God's word. For example, writing 14 epistles, or going on all the other various trips that he went on. Obviously, his career as a Pharisee probably helped him a lot in being educated enough to write to Greek-speaking populations, Latin-speaking populations, and Aramaic-speaking populations. In fact, he's probably quadrilingual, honestly. But the point there just kind of being that in at least that sense, there's always going to be the some level of your own will, if you will, dying and therefore becoming second place. Does that make sense?
Yeah. If you do you think I'm trying to think of this from how you would look at it. This he starts to cover here this let's see. Oh, she says Janet, the Christian of the Year, in my opinion, says 2 Timothy 3:12, all who live godly suffer persecution. And this says here too, look, let's see here. I scrolled away from it. Hold on. I wish I could scroll while I was in the StreamYard, but anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever has found his life shall lose it. And whoever lost his life for my sake shall find it. And he put suke, but he says this should be translated simply as life. There is a passage also in Matthew that uses the word suke in a way that suggests a Platonic view of the afterlife. Although I speak under correction, I believe that it is the only passage in the New Testament of which this can be said. And this is your favorite verse, I think, for dualism anyway, I would suspect, as I can understand. That is, do not fear those who can kill the soma, but not the suke. Fear rather him who is able to destroy both the suke and the soma in Gehenna. He says that one seems to suggest dualism, like you would say. Let's see what he says. That this is what some would call Q material. It is worth looking at the corresponding passage in Luke. This is interesting. This is Luke 12 now, instead of, I guess it was Matthew 10 or something, right? Do not fear those who kill the body, the soma, and after that have nothing more that they can do. Fear him who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into Gehenna. I regard the Luke in this latter passage as representing more accurately the Dominical saying that underlies both passages. I would suggest that Luke's wording reflects an understanding of what is suggested by the Greek opposition of suke and soma that is superior to that of the author of Matthew. Perhaps Luke cannot think of a good word to use as the direct object of cast, and for that reason uses the verb intransitively. I guess that would be the part where he says, let's see, the after has nothing more they can do. Fear him who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into Gehenna. Let's see.
So I'd actually have a couple problems with that, to be honest. The first is that I don't think that there are better or worse readings. I think that they are harmonious readings. I think.
Oh, indeed. I think he means for between deciphering the views, though.
Well, the thing is, though, is regardless of how he means it, it still ends up being effectively the same, which is, in his interpretation, one of these views is basically, one of these renderings is basically incorrect, and then the other one is correct, right? Which is, I think, incredibly problematic. I would say that what is actually more likely is that whatever our interpretation is, it has to be something that allows for both of them to be equally 100% valid. And in the case of Luke, Luke is actually being much more general here. He's just simply saying that God has the ability to have a total death, whereas human beings do not have the ability to give you a total death. But Matthew is being specific with what exactly is happening in that total death, right? Being able to snuff out the physical life, namely the body, as well as any other sort of continuing life that may exist. And one of the big reasons why I would say that this is a much better rendering of that is because I don't think they're taking a third source, right? What he refers to as Q. I don't think Q exists. If I'm being honest, I think there's as much evidence that Q exists as there is that there's leprechauns in my backyard. And I don't even have a backyard. So,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So that's, it's
he's
just,
presuming that both renderings are from a common source, which is called Q. For those who
yeah,
don't know.
exactly. I would say both renderings are from a common source, which is Jesus himself, if that counts as being a common source. But as far as a common physical source, I don't think they're both like taking quotes and then, for lack of a better term, offering their own explanation or commentary or something like that on this particular quote that they found. I think Matthew probably heard it firsthand, and Luke is
What
a
do you mean?
historian.
What do you mean? The source is Jesus. Do you just mean that it's an accurate rendering of what happened, or what
Yeah.
was said, or do you don't mean like they were dictating? They got letter for letter dictation or something, right? Or
Well,
yeah. Go ahead. I think every word is meant to be what it is, but of course, in the original, probably,
well,
But
yeah, and so I think there is.
dictation.
Well, there's a level of, I mean, it's not really dictation in a strict sense, but there is dictation in some sense, which is that I think that God, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, had every single word which he wanted written.
Right. I would call it. That's why I like to say providentially. But like the guy was writing, like he wasn't like consciously getting like putting his head in a hat and reading glowing letters off of a rock is what I mean.
Well, and obviously, minus the props, though, I think
Yeah.
that is kind of a 50-50 thing, right? Because and not literally 50-50. I guess who knows what the actual statistic would be. But like, for example, when somebody like Luke is writing, I mean, Luke just outright tells you what he's writing, and what he's writing is history. Whether he knew that he was writing scripture, I guess I don't really know, and it doesn't bother me one way or the other, because how he did it is still very clear. It wasn't, visionary or anything like that. He wasn't receiving audible voices. He was just writing the history of the early church and the biography of its founder as best he could. And I believe he did it infallibly, being a historian, inspired by the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely. But I think a really good indication that someone who's claiming to be a prophet is not a prophet is if they were to say, and I think this is a really good criteria too, to just take people off the board right off the bat. And that is if they're telling you, like the Muslims do, or like Joseph Smith does, that this is the perfect word of God because God like dictated it by an angel or like on a rock, and when I put my head in a hat or whatever, or I found the and thummim that I can't produce now, and got dictated letter for letter. I just think that they're probably full of crap because that's probably not how it happened in every case. I mean, in some cases more so in the Old Testament. I'm sure it's like, let's say the Lord's are like literally God speaking, but I don't think. I think that's just, it sounds good at first, because then it really verifies your pen, but I don't think that's the way it worked in the New Testament.
See, I do kind of disagree with that because I think some of the stuff that we have is definitely what we would call dictation. Like, so for example, when John writes the book of Revelation, I think that John was told to write every single letter of that exactly as he wrote it. But I think that was because that's what he says, right? He says that these are the visions that I received. This is a dictation directly
sure,
from
sure.
Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah, some of the parts for sure in Revelation, I would say, are more like dictation. But I mean, some of the forms of the way the literature is in there, though, is like literally uses the same language as like parts of the Book of Enoch. Like it's literally like he's describing it in the form that it's written in the Book of Enoch. Some parts like, and I saw this, and then like the form of that, and like when he says let me see, when he talks about Satan falling from heaven like lightning, that's like pretty much the same poetic form as parts of the Book of Enoch. And I mean, so it'd just be hard to like think that was dictated, right? I mean, I think that the reason that's not a problem though is we know the other book of Enoch is older, so it's like I would just say that he knew that book, and like just like we might describe something by the form of like a movie, we know if we like experienced something interesting and it related to something we knew, you might use a similar form because you're familiar with it. It's just like common parlance in the what do you think about that? I figure you might disagree with that, but
honestly,
how do you
I
explain
put
it?
a lot less stock in a lot of these, you know, explanations from the era, so to speak. Like, for example, you brought up this poetic structure of the Book of Enoch. I would just kind of almost sit on my hands in that instance and be like, I don't know that I buy that. You know what I mean? Not to be too, I guess, frank with it, but it just seems to me like a lot of times when we're trying to over apply context, right? We end up creating what I would call a pseudo context, which doesn't even really exist. Um, and I
I'll
think
have to show you the evidence because I didn't want it to be true, but then I saw it and it's like we know the Book of Enoch is older, and so let's say that it is. I mean,
well, but do we know that our Book of Enoch is older though? Because I'm not necessarily sure that we do.
The first, at least the Enoch 1 is, I believe, because it's found in the what do you call that? It's found in like the Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, or some part of it. So that would mean it's older, right? I mean,
yeah, and I guess so. Then the next question would be whether or not it actually is borrowing a structure from it or not, right? Which I would, but because we see this kind of stuff all the time with, like, for example, with Deuteronomy, they'll say Deuteronomy is very heavily influenced off of a suzerain treaty, right? I just don't believe that. You know what I mean? Like, I've read suzerain.
Yeah, I've never heard that. I've never heard or seen the evidence for that. So yeah, I'm definitely always skeptical of these claims for sure. I guess the Enoch one, I'll have to look at it again. I just felt I got a good explanation for it, and so from conservative fundamental believers, young Earth scholars that are in defense of the authenticity of all the the narrative of the whole Bible and all that, and so and
let me kind of explain kind of what one of the things that I think is important in this pseudo contextualizing thing I'm talking about, right? And I'll use John 1:1 as an example. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Right? And in the original Greek, that's "in the beginning was the Logos." Right? Now, there's a very interesting context there culturally, which is that the Logos is a known and developed 500-year-old philosophical concept that John could not possibly have not known about. Right? It's like, it's not even, it would be as ridiculous as me not knowing who Donald Trump was. You know what I mean? He absolutely knows the word Logos and why the word Logos is important. And, Philo of Alexandria uses it, and Heraclitus uses it, and Socrates uses it, and Antisthenes uses it, and all these other guys. I mean, this is just very well established and explained, right? And that's the word he uses. He says, "In the beginning was this Logos, and it was with God, and it actually was God." So it is a he, and this he is the creator being, and it's also with the creator being. It's all a very awesome and beautiful and complicated kind of thing. So we have a real context here, right? But now let's say that this was the only context that we were now allowed to use, that we had now had this, it had to be tied down to exactly what the Greek philosophical conception of Logos actually was, in other words. Well, that's not actually a thing. It's more of a, or excuse me, a person. It's more of a thing. Actually, I kind of got my words mixed up there. It's an impersonal sort of generalized quote reason that sort of vaguely powers everything and keeps it all together, right? You could almost consider it like a pantheistic glue in a sense, but it's certainly not like the actual sun or a personal being at all, for that matter. A lot more analogous, really, to the Tao than it is to what we would conceptualize as a pre-incarnate Jesus, right?
Right.
But it's still the word he chose to use. And when translating it into Chinese, they translated that word as Dao, right? And when they translated it into us, they translated it into our language. They translated it as the same thing we use to refer to the Bible itself, word. Um,
Isn't it
and
Memra in the Aramaic or something?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you. But the point just kind of being, it's not that any of those things were not deliberate, right? They certainly were. The association of in the beginning was the word, and we call the Bible the word. That's on purpose, right? And the translation of in the beginning was the Tao in Chinese Bibles. That's also, I think, on purpose. And the translation of in the beginning was the Logos. That's also on purpose. But none of it is so on purpose that we're actually talking about literally Jesus is a Bible with legs, or literally Jesus is the yin yang symbol walking around. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of one of the big things that I always find problematic with this too, is even if the context is there, I don't know if it necessarily means what people are claiming it means.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. You got to be careful what you necessarily presume to accept. You know, just look. You got to follow up on anything. But trying to remember where I heard the thing with the Enoch thing. But I guess I've just come to this conclusion that some of that it just doesn't matter. Like, um, I guess I've been influenced by Michael Heiser on that. Like, I don't buy everything he says. I don't agree with him on everything, of course. Very particularly, I don't agree with him. But I think some of it, like, I don't want to be like pretending. I don't want to just pretend like some parallel or something isn't there if it is, and just be blind to it. Like, I definitely don't buy a lot of the things like parallels with like the pagan deities and regarding Christ and all that. But there are other potential explanations besides just like whatever you call that, where you. I mean, that's the conclusion. I think a lot of that came up in the when they started doing critiquing the Bible or whatever. They came up with all these theories that were like dominant for a long time, as I recall hearing. It'd be fun. I might shut it down soon, but have you watched that thing about the New Testament scholar? Can't remember if I played it a while ago, but it's now I can't think of his name. Where he talks about the variants in the New Testament, and he critiques Bart Ehrman. I think he's debated him a few times too. I don't know, it's Craig Keener or something, maybe. No, I don't think that. Daniel Wallace, maybe. Sound familiar?
I mean, I'm sure I've probably watched it, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I will say, I have noticed recently in numerous different areas, I find myself in conflict with Michael Heiser and his interpretation of Revelation. So I'm not surprised that this would be another one, to be honest. It's which is, I guess it's fine. I'm not necessarily saying anything about it, but it does appear to me like I don't really know that, because Heiser's got this really, I don't know, it's an interesting thing. He really wants, it seems, the Bible to have a Mideast context. Like, it's almost really like a fun thing for him. And it started with what appears to me to be really truthful, like the whole idea that there is an existing heavenly host, and that ancients aren't necessarily just making stuff up, but that there's actually like a level of divine truth in what they're saying, even if it is perverted and gross, right? And I even kind of like bought that for a long time, but then it's like it seems like he just gets like more and more into this, like everything's got to be explained by either the Book of Enoch or the Sumerians or the Babylonians or something like that. You know what I mean? This is actually something that's found in the stars that happened 100 years before John is even writing. Yeah, and I don't know. It's bothersome to me, if I'm being honest. It almost makes it seem like he wants the Bible to be less fantastic. And I understand why somebody would want, if there's negative connotation to that word, right? Fantastic. But of course, there's also a very positive connotation to that word. And I kind of feel like, it's a fantastic document. We're talking about fantastic things, people seeing the future and then predicting them, or talking to God, or, splitting big bodies of water miraculously. You know what I mean? Like, I just
Good
don't
morning.
see a reason to be, I guess, worried about a lot of that stuff. And it seems to me like Heiser kind of is. And so like everything it's all in the past, or it's in the stars, or it's in the cultural context, or it has something to do with the Book of Enoch, you know what I mean? Or it's all anything but something that could be, quote, fantastic. You know what I mean? And I don't know, it's just weird to me.
Well, the whole point of a lot of his writing is to suggest we should believe in a supernatural. But I agree. I think he over applies Near Eastern context a little bit. Not as bad as some, and I disagree with him on that. I disagree with his unwillingness to make a distinction between canon and books like Enoch. I wish he would be a little stronger about that, because he never talks about why the differences in the problems. He's just like, well, we should be aware of it and familiar with it, which I agree with. But like, I would make more of a distinction about why we have to trust it as not canon and what the difference is and what that means. And he doesn't seem to ever go that far with it. And I think that's problematic. I think he's wrong about life after death too. And I think he's wrong about old earth. And I think he's wrong about, so I'm with you on a lot of that stuff. As far as, some of it is just how I've understood Revelation to agree with him on. I know he's kind of anti-Calvinist. I guess that's probably annoying too. I think he's also, he'll say stuff like, is what really made me mad to say, I'm not trying to pin. That kind of sounded like I was trying to pin that on you, like you just don't like him because of that. But I mean, I have reasons to be irritated at him, and I don't mean to pin that on you. Anyways, I don't think you're that way, but I do think, for me, the fact that he makes this long thing about how the Old Testament. I mean, this is the worst one for me. It's like when he says he says the same thing like what's his name? The guy who wrote the temple thing about Genesis. That guy. His name slips my mind, but really famous scholar.
Talk about John Walton.
Yeah, Walton. He says the same thing Walton does, and that is, I'm just a textual guy. But then they'll go on to like support evolution, old Earth type of thing. But that's fine. But he says, I'm just analyzing the text, and he'll go on and on about why the text totally leaves open the door for like local flood theory, right? And I'm just like, holy crap, dude! If that's true, like, what else is the text open to here, man? Like, come on. All the high hills under the whole heaven, 15 cubits above the highest mountain. It's like, come on, dude. Everything with the breath of the nostrils under the whole heaven perished unless it was on the ark. Just the context to that is like, if you're going to say the door is open for a local flood and old earth thing with that, fine. Okay. But then you should also, when it comes to soul sleep, he's like, it's just not possible. And he goes on about how, and one of his arguments is like, to crap on Heiser a little bit more here, because I do like him, but he says like, because none of the old ancient Near East cultures surrounding the Hebrew Israelites had this concept of soul sleep, that means it can't be true for the Hebrews. And I'm thinking, I'm just slapping my forehead. Like, that's an argument for it. The fact that it's not clear in scripture, especially in the Old Testament, or you could even argue, like a lot of scholars would say, they don't have any concept of our sense of dualism. And like, but yet they were like in Egypt, and Egyptians said things like, oh, when the person dies, their spirit flies away like a bird and stuff like that. So it's like they knew about these concepts, but they didn't make it clear in the scripture. God didn't make it clear in the scripture. So to say that because no other came, it's like he's literally like putting the Bible on the pagan altar there when he says that. Do you
Yeah,
get what I'm
and it's
saying?
almost like, because you could say the same thing about monotheism and monogamy. You know what I mean? So that's just, I definitely hear you there. Well, and here's another thing too. You know, I'm writing my Christmas book, right? Um, the way that I'm going to do it is so my format is I'm going to start with my argument for December 25th, lay all that out in probably about 10 chapters, and then I'm going to respond to objections to December 25th, and then I'm going to do brief steelmans and then takedowns of spring date and September 11th date, and then just kind of wrap
I'm
it up
gonna
with.
slap you.
Say
I'm still
again.
open. I'm still open.
Well,
We'll see.
let me hopefully give you something that should make you quite a bit more open potentially, because I'm gonna
Okay.
double check this. So it has come to my attention that the sign that is discussed, which I guess does not originally come from Heiser. Heiser got it from a guy named Martin, Dr. Martin. I can't remember his first name, but there are astronomers who say that sign did not actually happen. So I'm in the process of trying to find a planetarium. I think the only planetarium that's open near me is in Twin Falls, so I'm going to have to take a trip to Twin Falls, and I'm going to actually see if they can, if we can get like an image of September 11th, 3
Is that
BC.
near Spokane?
No, it'd be on the other side, closer to like the, as you go to Montana, Wyoming. And yeah, so I'm gonna look into that, and I don't, obviously some guy says something on the internet, right? So who knows? But I'm gonna actually go to a planetarium and try and check.
Oh, I was thinking
Um,
of Post Falls. Post Falls is what I was thinking of. Sorry, go ahead.
well, yeah, and so I'll actually do a little recording there, and either it'll be me showing people, hey, check out this cool thing that actually totally lines up with what Heiser and Martin are saying, or, and this is more actually what I expect, I don't think the Revelation 12 sign is going to be there, honestly. I think this might be a little bit of a biff, because the people who I started reading who were saying it was a biff were decidedly not apologists but astronomers, and that was pretty interesting to me. It was a little bit, because I kind of took this for granted, actually, that this is something that was, because I thought that it had actually originally come from calculations that were based off of the Star of Bethlehem calculations. But actually, as it turns out, the Star of Bethlehem calculations from Mr. Larson, those might actually be wrong too. So,
Oh,
and
really?
that's yeah, that's which that'll, I don't know. Not that this is the point of saying any of this kind of stuff, right? But that would certainly, I guess, benefit my theory here. Although I was using that as part of my theory, so the way it ends up benefiting my theory does mean I have to change the theory a little bit. But regardless, yeah, it turns out that Star of Bethlehem documentary might not even really be accurate, for a couple of reasons. The first reason, and really the most important one, being that the triple conjunction that is supposed to make this really bright star, that is to be the Star of Bethlehem, would not be the same, and in fact wouldn't even include the quote Messiah star of Regulus. And so, in other words, they would see a star in the east and then would show up under a completely different quote star, right? Which would be a little bit interesting. Also, the star wouldn't actually appear at any point in time. It would just appear to be Jupiter getting a lot brighter,
Right.
right?
Do you think do you think do you suspect that the quote unquote wise men got their information because of Daniel being in the area, his documentation or something?
I don't know if I necessarily would say one way or the other. I strongly suspect that Zoroastrianism is basically like a carbon copy of what Daniel was teaching while in Babylon.
Well, how would they know though that this? I mean, because what we were talking about earlier with the whole, the whole astronomical thing. You seem kind of conservative about that, rightfully so. But surely, though, then we should suspect that the only way they would know is through Daniel.
Well, it would kind of depend, to be honest with you, because, like I said, I do suspect that the entire Zoroastrian religion is ultimately derived from Daniel in a sense. Not in the sense that he founded it, but in the sense that I think Zoroaster was probably a contemporary of Daniel and probably very strongly influenced by him.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as how would these guys know how to come to where the Messiah would be, unless it was like just a one-off miracle or something, but like God told them, but it doesn't say that, does it?
Well, and but one of the reasons that I even bring that up is just to say I could see that as being possible because of the fact that I think that this is something, but even then that wouldn't be a direct thing. It'd be an indirect thing, right? Zoroaster would be somebody who heard what Daniel taught and then sort of co-opted it for his own purposes, which is actually what I think happened.
But they're like, there's no record of like telling him about like, well, I don't actually know, I guess, but like that's a pretty specific sign or whatever, right? That's not.
Well, the other thing though too is just to you got to think as far as as far as why these particular wise men were aware of this and decided to go and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, there's just not really unless the Bible actually gives us a specific hint, there's just nothing that you can really say, right? Because the problem is there's so many different things that could possibly be the answer because of an absence of evidence that you're just never going to get anywhere. You know what I mean? Like it could be some information passed down over the last 500 years going all the way back to Daniel. It could be a revelation. It could be that there was something in Persian culture that indicated to them that a very powerful king was born at this particular astronomical sign. It could be, you know what I mean? It could be so many different things is just kind of the point. In the absence of more information, there's just nothing more you can really say.
Other than God uses the stars, right? I mean,
well, and I would certainly agree with that. Yeah. One thing I will say though is it is, one of the things that I found problematic about, because in studying this Star of Bethlehem thing, and obviously, of course, I believe there was a real Star of Bethlehem. So, as far as people in the audience, just so you guys know, I'm talking about the documentary Star of Bethlehem by Frederick Larson, not the actual Star of Bethlehem. When I say the Star of Bethlehem thing, right? But regardless, it's a fundamental part of the September 11th birth date thing, right? The first thing I do want to point out that the two people who did this actually come to different conclusions. One says September 11th, and the other one said, I believe, June 21st, and the other one being June 21st, 2 BC. But nonetheless, the two guys who did the documentary actually came to different conclusions as far as when Jesus was born, which I found very interesting. But regardless, the other really big problem with that is the trip from Persia to Israel takes about a month. And under this particular scheme, it would take them over a year to make it. And that doesn't make any sense at all. When they see the sign, they appear to immediately want to leave and go to Israel, obviously passing through Jerusalem. So we can assume there was a little bit of time. Let's give them 3 months to be generous, right? The idea that they'd be, 6 months to a year of traveling time is just, there's just no reason for it whatsoever, right? And what we would have to suspect in order for this to be the case is when in August of 3 BC, when this sign supposedly starts. They're observing it. By September, they're deciding to leave, but they're not actually going to show up until December of 2 BC, right? That just doesn't work. And even if you try to push that forward to the last major conjunction before December, which would be June of 2 BC, that 6 months is still way too long, right? Persia's just right next door. It's a hop, skip, and a beat away. So it's just, and there, like I said, I'm going to actually be looking at a planetarium to see if the sign's even there in the first place. But the Revelation 12 sign, I am beginning to suspect, is not going to be there. And I have a feeling that what they found in the Star of Bethlehem documentary is just not what they think it is.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember I never really tied the Star of Bethlehem thing to it. But, I mean, I can imagine, I don't know how long it's, like, I don't really tie the wise men thing to it. But I never really thought that about that part of it, support. It seems like I had some issue with that too, with that documentary, but it was a while ago that I watched it. But, I mean, what I'm not quite sure what ties the two together necessarily.
Well,
other than obviously that it would be related, right? Because is that part of the sign supposedly? Is the Star of Bethlehem?
Well, so the claim about Revelation 12 and the claim about the Star of Bethlehem being this triple conjunction both come from the same documentary, which is the Star of Bethlehem. Okay. And they're from.
Maybe I didn't see it then.
Yeah, and they're from Frederick Larson and a guy, Dr. Martin. I can't remember his first name, but he's the guy who I guess is Heiser's main. I think it's E.R. Martin. Not that helped with his first name.
Oh, this is his source. I didn't even realize that. That's how pathetic I am. Well, you obviously watched the little. I mean, you can do this apparently you can do this on a free program, like it's astronomy program, I guess.
Yeah, I was looking for one online, but I couldn't actually find one, so I'm gonna have to see if someone can send that to me there.
Let me see if I can find that thing where it's just explaining the. I think it uses one of the programs. Maybe we can find out what program it is here. Hold on. I know he does a long presentation with Capturing Christianity. I think I sent it to you, but I don't know if. And I remember it was really long presentation on there where he goes into a bunch of it. I don't know if now this is the one I want to say. Let's see. Many people have copied this now. Let's see if I can get an English one here real quick. This short one. I think let's see. This might be a short one.
In 2014 by George Barna. Maybe you know who George Barna is, who writes about trends and things like that in the Christian community. He said, if you spend time searching God's word for most of the common practices in conventional churches, you will rarely find them. If you go further and spend time tracing the history of those practices, you will soon discover that most of our religious habits are man-made choices. In fact, you're likely to discern a pattern about the way we, quote, do church these days. If we do it, it's probably not in the Bible as one of the practices of the early church. These are just some of the conclusions I've come to. And one of them that really bothered me, to be honest with you, is the fact that pretty much all of our holidays honor Nimrod.
Okay. Lie, dude. Come on, man. Come on.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. That's kind
of Zeus, of Mithra, of Osiris,
yeah, I didn't know what this
of all the
was.
dying, resurrecting sun gods of antiquity.
What is this dude?
He's a flat earther, I think now.
Man, I gotta be honest. I like because I've been doing this whole holiday kick thing now, right? And it's gotten to the point of where like I am thoroughly annoyed with these dudes. They are so it's worse than Ancient Aliens. Like it really is. Like yeah. Nimrod. First off, there is no record of Nimrod's birth on the entire planet until like the 1900s. So, like, there's that. I mean, the 1900s. If people start talking about this dude's birthday in the 1900s, do you think they actually know that? Probably not, right? But then there's also this Like, how is it that people don't realize after the 27 billionth god that it was allegedly born on December 25th that there's something not here, right? Like I've heard Jupiter was born on December 25th, and Buddha and Lao Tzu and Confucius and Zoroaster and Krishna and Osiris, and I mean it's just on and on and on and on and on and on and on. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, so like if I went up to somebody and just started throwing darts all over the map, saying, no, this is actually the right one. No, this is actually this one. It's actually this one. Like,
you will lose credibility very, very fast.
So quickly, right? I'd be laughed out of the room. But anyway, sorry. I just,
Oh, no,
anyways.
you're fine, buddy. You're passionate about it. That's okay.
Do you have an opinion on this, bro?
I'm
glad you're here.
I go out of my way trying not to make myself stupid by like cringe conspiracy theories. Like what I would say honestly is that like
I didn't mean that, but
yeah. Oh no, you're fine. But usually people that do this, that they want to say, well, you see, this god was born on such and such a day, and you see like this understanding in their practices, things like that. This is really just something called slander at the end of the day. Because what it's really trying to do, they basically have a group with an axe to grind against, and Jehovah's Witnesses are notoriously guilty for this. They have a particular group with an axe to grind against, and they'll take their modern practices and do their best to kind of warp them so as to kind of justify their own. And so that's really what this is. When you hear the understanding that, oh, you see like Odin and Saturnalia, this was actually on the 25th, therefore it's pagan. It's really just a exercise in character assassination at the end of the day.
Yep. It's veiled, fake, pious attitude or whatever. So we're talking about when Jesus was born, and so I'm just going to show a real quick clip of this, and we can talk about it.
I want to show you a short set of slides to explain what I mean about astral prophecy. These slides come from a PowerPoint that I use when I lecture on this. What you're looking at here is an image from some astronomy software that I have. This red line right here is the ecliptic. That's an imaginary line that astronomers use, and it marks the path of the constellations of the zodiac. Obviously, we have sun and moon here along the ecliptic in this illustration. Here's an illustration of the, again, familiar constellations, how they follow the ecliptic right here. Now, what we have here, and again, this is part of a lecture I do in Revelation 12, is the constellation Virgo, the Virgin. If you go back and read Revelation 12, it is very obviously about the virgin birth, the birth of Jesus, the Messiah. But the signs and symbols that are used in Revelation 12 are well-known astronomical symbols. The constellation Virgo is the only one that represents a woman. For 20 days, Virgo is clothed with the sun. That's an astronomical term that means the sun appears in the constellation. That language comes from Revelation 12. But in Revelation 12, we not only have the sun clothing the woman, or inside the woman, we have the moon at her feet. The important note here is that for 20 days, Virgo gets clothed with the sun. But the exact day when the moon was under her feet can occur only during an 80-minute window within that span of days. So both of these signs, the sun in Virgo and the moon at her feet, are important. And the sun is about midway in her midsection. Again, there's symbology there as far as a pregnancy. If you actually looked up the constellation Virgo in Norton's star atlas, and I'm sure other atlases, there would be 12 visible stars around her head. Again, this is all well-known ancient world symbology and astronomical observable astronomy. If we look at the alignment of constellations, here's Virgo in the middle. I've taken the pictures out and just done the line drawings. Sun in the midst of Virgo, moon at her feet right here. Above Virgo's head is Leo, of course, the lion symbology, the Lion of Judah. Within Jupiter, at the very same time that Virgo is closed with the sun and the moon is at her feet, we have a conjunction between Regulus and Jupiter. Jupiter is known as the king star in ancient astronomy. It's because it's the biggest one. Regulus, of course, if you know Latin, you know that's terminology for the king. That is the king star. So we have the king planet, Jupiter, and the king star Regulus in conjunction. If you did any reading on like out of Martin's book or some other sources, this is very important symbology for a royal birth. It's known all through the ancient world. It just so
Is there going
happens
to be
that
a
in
point
this
at some point
situation,
here,
we
like at
have-
all?
Yeah, the point is this all happens on September 11th, 3 BC, apparently.
Oh my god. Okay, well, there's a huge problem, right? Initially, right? Like, at the very beginning, he seems to try to associate Virgo with kind of the Virgin Mary, Queen of Heaven. Am I wrong?
Yeah, well, you could still associate it with the Virgin Mary, I guess.
Well, yeah, because it seems like that's what he's doing. Because in the beginning, it seemed like he was kind of associating this constellation with the Virgin Mary from the Bible. Am I mistaken there? Is that what he was doing?
No, it's from Revelation 12.
Yeah. Okay. No, there's a huge problem with that because actually, first of all, during the Middle Ages, the Virgin from Revelation 12 was actually seen as Mary. And again, there's various arguments for and against that. But regardless, any understanding that this had to do with Christianity in any way, shape, or form came out from the Middle Ages. Historically, this is not who the Virgin was. The Virgin historically was a woman named Erigone. Erigone. It's a Greek term. And basically, she was betrothed to Icarus of Athens, who was later slain in battle. In grief, she hung herself, dying a virgin. That's what, when you look up in the constellations, you see the constellation Virgo. That's the mythological figure it is a reference to, and that's who it was historically for like thousands of years until Christianity came on the scene, and especially in the Middle Ages. So already he is assuming something anachronistic in his own theory, and he hasn't even got it off the ground yet. You can play it now, Jamie. Go ahead.
Okay. CJ, do you want to say anything?
Not yet.
this simultaneous conjunction in the constellation Leo, again, which was in Jewish astronomy and Jewish astrology, and that was practiced for many centuries. We have we have the sign of a royal birth in the tribe of Judah, which is obviously messianic. And by the way, the whole thing about Jewish astrology, there have been a number of zodiac mosaics uncovered in Jewish synagogues in Palestine in the early centuries, the early church. Their whole dissertations written on this subject, Jewish and Christian attitudes toward the stars. There is an orthodox astronomy, an orthodox astrology, if you want to call it that. In the ancient world, astronomy and astrology are pretty blurred. And there are obvious non-orthodox or pagan systems as well. Below here, below the woman, okay, we have the sun in Virgo and the Virgin, moon at her feet. In modern zodiac, we have here Scorpio and then Libra, the scales. In the ancient world, these were combined. If you can conceive of this in your imagination, here's the tail of Scorpio, and then Libra was thought to be the claws that were joined right here. So this entire set of what are now two constellations were in the ancient world viewed as one, and it was known as the dragon. Again, that's right out of Revelation 12. Here's a superimposed picture over it. Now we have Scorpio and Libra, the scales, but in the ancient times, this was one known as the dragon. There's another candidate for the dragon in Revelation 12 on the other side of the ecliptic. We have Hydra right here. But I tend to think that what John is describing is the ancient dragon constellation right here, Scorpio and Libra combined in today's terminology. Now, the important thing about this is that in Revelation 12, all of these signs can occur, again, in only an 80-minute window of each other. So to account for all the signs in Revelation 12 during not just one calendar year, but during a whole series of astronomical periods and ages, you have a very small window of time where all of these things can be present at the same time, where everything is accounted for. The birth of the child in Revelation 12, as I have a note up here, again, whom John identified with Jesus, occurring while the sun was clothing the woman, the king star, king planet in Leo, again, Jupiter, or it's not Jupiter, but the sign for the tribe of Judah. All of these things did occur in a year that fits well for Jesus' birth, and that is 3 BC. What I've just laid out for you is common knowledge in many planetaria throughout the country and in Europe, that this is one of the candidates for the birth of Christ. It's the only birth year that accounts for all of these symbols. So if you read in the academic literature about candidates for the birth of Christ, they range anywhere from 2 BC to 6 BC. But none of the scholarly literature that I've seen considers Revelation 12, and I think that's the missing element. The real sort of interesting thing about 3 BCs is since this concatenation of signs can only occur in an 80-minute window, we know exactly the date of the birth of the Messiah in 3 BC, and that date is September 11th, which, again, this kind of spooks people. September 11th, 3 BC is the only time, the only day for many, many, many centuries that you could have all of these signs come together. This date as well, if you notice this note, also corresponded at the time to Rosh Hashanah, Tishri 1, New Year's Day for the Jews, which was also the Day of Trumpets. This was the day that many of the ancient kings and rulers of Judah reckoned as their inauguration day of rule. That procedure was followed consistently in the time of Solomon, Jeremiah, and Ezra. This is the day that would have marked the birth of the King of the Jews. And so we have an alignment with the Jewish tradition, the Jewish calendar, all the astronomical imagery in Revelation 12. September 11th, 3 BC can also accommodate all of the circumstances associated with the death of Herod and all these historical questions that come up when people are trying to come up with a date for the birth of Christ. And again, you won't find this in a lot of the scholarly literature because they aren't considering Revelation 12. They're using Matthew 2 with the wandering star, and what that was, it was the conjunction of Jupiter and Regulus. Jupiter has retrograde motion; it appears to move in the sky. Again, this is all well known in the literature. That much they do cover. But the missing link here is the Revelation 12, taking that seriously as astral prophecy.
See, so there's a couple things here. So the first thing is he refers to as astral prophecy. By definition, those who prophesy things that have already occurred are fraudulent. And that's always been my biggest problem with this. But I just have to point that out only because he's actually using the term astral prophecy, which is so it's almost like he's telling us that he thinks that John is a fraud. I don't know if he realizes that he's telling us that he thinks that John is a fraud, but that's just definitionally so if John is prophesying about something that has already happened. So that is just problematic terminology, I think there. However, the point that I want to make, the points I want to make out here are a couple fold. The first one being that, like I said, he said this is well known in most planetariums. But again, I've actually come across quite a bit of astronomers who are saying that this is just not true. This whole the moon at the feet and sun being cloaked and Jupiter in the womb and all that other kind of stuff. It's just not actually there. And so with that, like I said, I'm just going to have to verify that with people on an actual, planetarium or in some kind of an actual planetary system that can show us what was occurring on September 11th, 3 BC. Because it's great to have like a painted picture and stuff like that, or a digitally altered picture. But we would need to be seeing is something that we can reasonably something that we know will reasonably tell us what is actually there in the sky on this particular date, right? He just kind of made a bunch of claims after he showed us a digitally altered image, which is just it's not very convincing to me, right? The other kind of big problem that I think that we have here is there's a couple of just big factual errors that I kind of didn't notice before. Like, for example, he says that Scorpio and Libra are supposed to be this one sign. That's not true at all. I mean, the zodiac, the 12 the 12-part zodiac came from these Greeks. It didn't come from us, right? We didn't make it up. Well, like, what do you think we named the ram Aries for? You know what I mean? It had nothing to do with us. This actually comes directly from the people that he's saying actually had this as one thing. That's just not true. Then he also mentions Rosh Hashanah as the first of the year. That's also not true. That's true in the 21st century, and it was true in the Middle Ages, but it's not true in the time of ancient Israel. In fact, Exodus 12 quite plainly says that the first of the year is Aviv or Nisan 1, depending on what you want to call that month. So
Yeah.
I think there's quite a bit of just kind of like factual error, if I may be frank, in
Yeah,
this
no,
presentation.
I wanted to say that too. You actually seem to be kind of forwarding my argument too here, CJ, because I like as I noted already, much of the assumptions he's gathering from were from the Middle Ages. For instance, associating Virgo with the Virgin Mary, or rather, but like the Virgin in Revelation, like the Virgin Revelation in the Middle Ages was often interpreted to be a type of Virgin Mary. And so this understanding of that constellation is no older than the Middle Ages. Before that, she was a virgin, but the Virgo was an actual virgin, but from a Greek tragedy. Before that, after that is when you see like this Christian understanding of associating the constellation with the Virgin of Revelation 12 or the Virgin Mary. And so the fact of the matter is, much of his own assumptions, much of the base of his argument comes from a medieval understanding, which itself is a little bit anachronistic. Quite a bit, actually.
Also, I'd point out that he did actually mention what the original biblical meaning of Yom Teruah, which is today called Rosh Hashanah, is. It's not called Rosh Hashanah in the Bible. The Rosh Hashanah is very clearly Nisan 1. Or Aviv 1, depending on, because sometimes it goes by a different name, but regardless. But the purpose of Yom Teruah in the Bible, it's the Feast of Trumpets or the Day of Trumpets, right? And it's meant to kick off what's known as the Days of Awe before Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. It's the day that the high priest is going to go in and he's going to, have the sacrificed goat and the scapegoat and that whole thing that we all know so well because we've argued about it like 400 times at this point. And this is a big deal for the Jews. Even to this day, there are people, I mean, there's a pitcher, I can't remember his name. I think it was Sandy Cusack or something like that. I don't know. I'm not a baseball fan too big. But regardless, he wasn't even a Orthodox Jew or an observant Jew. And yet when Yom Kippur comes around in the World Series, he decides not to play because it's just that important of a day to Jewish people, and it always has been, right? And so what Yom Teruah was meant to do is it kicks off these days of awe, which are days of repentance and fasting and praying and cleansing one's home and all these other sorts of things before the Day of Atonement, right? And so it's not like a start date for kings or a start date for the year as we have in the modern Jewish understanding from the Talmud, but it's actually a period that's supposed to get everybody ready for the coming atonement day, for the coming judgment day, right? Um, it's almost like a pre-holiday, if you will. Well, and you really can't even call it a holiday, too. The reason that they call them the high holidays is not because they're super important not because they're super fun, right? But because they're super important. But they're actually quite solemn days, right? They're actually days that, if you're an Orthodox Jew, you're not really celebrating. You're actually fasting and praying some more and going to worship services and cleaning your home and eating
So,
unleavened bread and all this other stuff.
so it's kind of like Lent then, in a way, right?
Yeah, in a very serious way, it definitely is. Um, and yeah, so the idea that is the beginning of the year. I think it comes from the Talmud, if I'm not mistaken, because of some adopting of practices that they took from the Babylonians. Because of course, once they actually were taken into captivity, they adopted a lot of the cultural practices there. And some of them are benign, and that one is one that's particularly benign. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything that the first of the year started there. It means something a little bit in the sense that God said that it starts some other time. And so the Jewish people should have honored that because it was in their covenant that he said that, right? In other words, that doesn't necessarily matter for us, but for the Jewish people, I think it probably did. But it's also not like the hugest deal in the world is another part of the point, right? It's relatively benign. But regardless, it does come from the Babylonians that starting the first of the year on Rosh Hashanah or on Yom Teruah, to be proper about it.
I see. Okay.
You've been studying. Are you guys? Anybody have a topic idea? We could watch that thing that we talked about before. I could show you that clip where.
Well, here's the thing, Jimmy. Well, here's the thing, Jimmy. This is your show, okay? That's again, like if this was if this was in my chat, we'd be talking about what I damn well please. So, by all means, Jimmy, if you want to talk about something, you do it.
Well, yeah, it was kind of a last minute idea, so I didn't have anything.
Well,
planned.
I mean,
yeah.
Oh, okay, well then, does anybody have ideas? Like CJ seems quite educated and it could bring up interesting conversations. Also, am I roboting on anybody's end?
No, you're fine.
No,
Hi, Wilder.
Yeah, thanks for letting me on. And yeah, I'll let the intelligent people talk. I'm just here to listen.
Right on. Well,
you guys are all too kind. To be fair, I am currently in the process of writing a book on why I believe Jesus was born on December 25th. So it's not just that, it's not just that I just am particularly smart, I guess. It's more that like I've been studying this in particular for some time.
I see. Yeah, no, because something I brought up with Wild Heart, and actually because it's kind of like something that I've been kind of researching more or less for the last 2 years, and if y'all want to talk about that, because it seemed like last time I spoke to Wild Heart, he was interested about this.
Yeah, it was very good in Yeah.
Yeah, because last time I talked to Wild Heart, he seemed interested in this, just like everybody in the West, whether it's Europe and America or Canada, we're all Christians, and yet a lot of us just don't realize it. I mean, even Christians in the West, oftentimes we take for granted just how Christian we are, like just how distant we are from from every culture, both contemporary and ancient. It's like very humbling when you when you do that. Because because this has been my understanding of something I've been looking at for the last 2 years, and right now actually I'm halfway done making a paper actually arguing that superheroes themselves are in fact like Christian icons. That our understanding of heroism is so steeped in Christianity that we see it in the movie theaters, we see it in our video games, in our music, and we don't even realize it. It's just that that internalized.
Yeah, and I would largely agree with that. Actually, it's one of the interesting things about a lot of, and this will appear random at first, but when you study like far right politics in Europe, one of the interesting things that you find is they're very often not anywhere near what you would consider Christians theologically, right? Like they don't believe in the virgin birth or Jesus raising from the dead or all this other kind of stuff. But because they are well versed in their history, their whole Western nationalism is built on this idea of a quote Christian identity, and it's a super weird kind of thing to hear, because you'll hear these people talk about Jesus as if he's like this really awesome political philosopher, rather than actually God, and it's like their inspiration for, ironically enough, uh, rather racist far right politics. Which, to be fair, is obviously has nothing to do with the Bible itself. It has to do with the history of Europe. But that's sort of my point. Is like Europe's history is so tied, and therefore America's, right, and Canada's, and et cetera, is so tied to Christianity that you almost can't even describe Western values outside of it.
Absolutely. And like even when, like, say you would have like a different people of the different philosophers today really want to argue that our values were actually contingent from the ancient past. Like they'll actually say that Rome and Greece kind of had the West, right? And some would go as far as say that even Egypt had the West, right? And as time went on, different civilizations just added to its understanding. No, because here's the thing: even that, right? The attempt to distance oneself from the past, from what came before you, is itself actually very Christian. You see a lot of this. You see this profoundly on display, kind of with the Protestant Reformation, and even later on in the Enlightenment, and then today with Western atheists. Well, they a lot of them want to say that, well, the values were contingent on the ancients. What they are doing is just a very Christian past of essentially trying to mythologize your past as a way of trying to isolate and separate yourself from it, right? So like almost as a way of casting out darkness into your kind of light, because you're casting yourself as the enlightened ones and what came before you as both dark, superstitious, and primitive. So even when atheists are trying to do that, they are unironically doing a very Christian practice.
You got us always. A joke, sorry. Yeah, I consider myself like culturally Christian. I was brought up Christian, and you still hold a lot of the values and teachings, whether you want to or not. Yeah,
and that's actually the thing. Like with again, like half of the reason why I'm Christian, like because people will often just say that being Christian isn't rational, or having a religion isn't rational. It's like, yeah, you're not wrong. But again, rationality does not determine truth.
That's making the mistake of thinking you've got a choice in it. A lot of time you don't.
Yeah, exactly. Because here's rationality doesn't make you a. Oh, Jamie left. Rationality doesn't make you right. Because moreover to the fact that how am I going to say this? Okay, because our values, our understanding of the world, is actually culturally contingent. The idea that people have any value at all, that somehow like women are actually worth a damn, or that people shouldn't be enslaved, or the fact that you have this expectation of both civil or human rights. When you boil it down, when you really think about these issues and you do study on them, you realize that everything from human rights to feminism to secularism, these are every bit as theological as heaven, hell, God, Satan, original sin, the sacrament of penance. All of these things are theological. It's just today's state of secularists, right? They would rather just take these particular theological topics and try to claim that they're neutral, and they're not. They're culturally contingent. Like they came from a time and place, and they're every bit as theological as I am.
I would just have that a lot of it's like psychological, and it's not just based on religion. There's a lot of philosophical as well.
Right, definitely. But
I agree with what you said. Yeah.
Right, but even that though, even that has a particular limit, because much of philosophy, such as Greek philosophy, right, plays a role in Christian theology, especially Aristotle, right? His understanding of theology has influenced John in the writing of his gospel. It's influenced Aquinas in the Summa Theologica, and so many different other ways. So, like, even if you're going to assert that, like, we're also philosophical, again, that's just one part of the Christian seedbed that gave rise to it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think
I
Jamie
actually
wants
love
to
this
show-
topic, actually.
I think Jamie wants to show us something real quick. So if anybody else, like Wildheart or CJ, wants to add to that, you can. Then we can listen to what Jamie says.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Crime and Punishment, he has his main character, Raskolnikov. In Dostoevsky's book Crime and Punishment, he has his main character, Raskolnikov, decides that he's going to commit a murder, and he has very good justification for the murder. And Dostoevsky's very good at this. He puts his characters into very, very difficult moral situations and gives them full justification for pursuing the pursuing the pathway that they're pursuing. And so Raskolnikov, he's broke and starving. He wants to go to law school. His sister's about to prostitute herself, roughly speaking, by marrying a guy that hates her, that she hates, and he has contempt for her, at least acts in that manner. He's trying to rescue his mother as well, who's also in dire financial straits. He goes to a pawnbroker to pawn his meager possession so that he can continue to scrape by. And she has this niece, I believe it's her niece, that's not very bright, who she basically treats as a slave and is horrible to. And so the pawnbroker has this money. Raskolnikov is in dire need. He thinks, look, I'll just kill her, because why the hell not? I'll take her money. She's not doing any good with it anyways. I'll free her niece, who's just lurking as a slave. She's got all these other people tangled up in her pawnbroker schemes. All that'll happen is the world will be a better place. And the only thing that's holding me back is conventional moral cowardice. And, Dostoevsky has his character in Crime and Punishment go through days, hours and days and weeks of intense imagination about this, rationalization about this, trying to justify himself, placing himself outside the law so that he can perpetrate this act, and telling himself with all the best nihilistic arguments that the only possible thing that could be holding him back is an arbitrary sense of indoctrinated morality. And so Dostoevsky explores that. He does commit the murder, and then, of course, all hell breaks loose because things don't necessarily turn out the way that you want. He gets away with it, however. Well, he gets away with it technically because no one knows he did it. But he doesn't get away with it in relationship to his own conscience. And so the rest of the book explores that. Well, Dostoevsky, I believe it was in Crime and Punishment, although he makes the same point in many of his books, he makes a very fundamental point. And this is the kind of point that I think that people who haven't investigated these matters down this particular literary and philosophical pathway never grapple with. Dostoevsky said straightforwardly, if there's no God, so if there's no higher value, let's say, if there's no transcendent value, then you can do whatever you want. And that's the question that he's investigating. And you see, this is why I have such frustration, say, with people like Sam Harris, the sort of radical atheists, because they seem to think that once human beings abandon their grounding in the transcendent, that the plausible way forward is with a kind of purist rationality that automatically attributes to other people equivalent value. It's like, I just don't understand that. They believe that that's the rational pathway. What the hell is irrational about me getting exactly what I want from every one of you whenever I want it at every possible second? Why is that irrational? And how possibly is that more irrational than us cooperating so we can both have a good time of it? I don't understand that. I mean, it's as if the psychopathic tendency is irrational. There's nothing irrational about it. It's pure naked self-interest. How is that irrational? I don't understand that. Where's the pathway from rationality to an egalitarian virtue? Why the hell not every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost? It's a perfectly coherent philosophy. And it's actually one that you can institute in the world with a fair bit of material success if you want to do it. So I don't see. To me, I think that the universe that people like Dawkins and Harris inhabit is so intensely conditioned by mythological presuppositions that they take for granted the ethic that emerges out of that as if it's just a given, a rational given. And this, of course, precisely not Nietzsche's observation as well as Dostoevsky's. That's Nietzsche's observation. You don't get it. The ethic that you think is normative is a consequence of its nesting inside this tremendously lengthy history, much of which was expressed in mythological formulation. You wipe that out. You don't get to keep all the presuppositions and just assume that they're rationally axiomatic. To make a rational argument, you have to start with an initial proposition. Well, the proposition that underlies Western culture is that there's a transcendent morality. Now, you could say that's a transcendent morality instantiated in the figure of God. That's fine. You could even call that a personification of the morality. If you don't want to move into a metaphysical space, I'm not arguing for the existence of God. I'm arguing that the ethic that drives our culture is predicated on the idea of God, and that you can't just take that idea away and expect the thing to remain intact midair without any foundational support.
Again, Peterson, my boy, does it again. Because he's absolutely right. Like, think about it is actually, it's interesting that Sam Harris would say, because again, like Sam Harris's understanding, right? That how do I want to put this? Again, it's rather controversial, and it has gotten me into trouble a few times, but it's something I thoroughly believe, that today's Western atheism, which was derived from the Enlightenment, is just merely another recycling of the Protestant Reformation, and oftentimes using those same assumptions. In fact, when you go back in time and look at Ulrich Zwingli, John Calvin, and Martin Luther, kind of making their sermons against the Catholic Church, like, they sound like today's atheists. Well, and that's because today's atheists are nothing more than like the intellectual progeny of Protestant reformers, using their same ideas, their same understanding of ethics, their same polemics and argumentation. They're even the same. Like Protestants back in the day, and especially when they finally got their roots in the 17th century, when they would write, they clearly acted as if the Protestant Reformation or Reformation ideology and theology was kind of the norm, kind of how would I say, the default, right? And everything else had to be proven against it. And that was just the assumption of that's just the assumption that the Reformation took of itself moving forward. Today, that's exactly how atheists see themselves. They see atheism as sort of a default, and then every other philosophy and theology needs to be proven against their understanding of atheism. It's again, it is this recycling, this regurgitation of the Reformation, and that's what Sam Harris is.
Only godless, of course, and
yeah, and here's the thing, but that's what
any root in the sense of appreciating any part of what their historical background is, or pretending it didn't exist. I guess I can see what you're saying. Like, I can't really argue with you that there isn't similarities, but yeah, I mean, it's.
Yeah, and this is the thing. This is the thing. Today, what we have, and this is what I mean. I'm not saying that like Sam Harris secretly believes in God, right, or thinks that or secretly thinks the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. That's not what I'm saying. My point is that these intellectual assumptions that Sam Harris carries can be seen as a clear lineage of descent from the Reformers. That's what I'm saying. Now, CJ might disagree with me, but I'm not. But again, I'm not saying this to throw shade on Protestantism. But it's how I put it. Even before I converted Catholic, this was something that I had seen in today's atheists, that they often acted like militant Protestants, like you would see them act in the Middle Ages. And it was something that I've seen before. It's not any smear I'm putting up against Protestants. It's a God's honest truth, I believe. And so, but what's going on? It rather kind of shows just the kind of potency that Christianity still has, even on people that don't claim any religion at all. Because, like, and again, this understanding that man is kind of that it has ration or a reason, and that through reason he can be delivered into this understanding of God's morality, right? Or the understanding that God can be understood through and by reason. Again, that's something that the Reformation picked up from the Renaissance that came 100 years before. And so what's going on here is that what Jordan Peterson is kind of laying out is that, yeah, our values, they are culturally contingent on Christian belief. And the longer that you suspend that Christian belief, the less reason you will have for believing in it, right? The less ways you will have of preserving that civilization. And yet, while it's here, you can clearly see that modern day Christians, as much as Western atheists, are every bit the heirs of this civilization.
Totally. I think
And anything to add on that, CJ?
A surprising amount of agreement, believe it or not. One of the things so I'm a huge Da Vinci fan. My favorite painter of all time is Leonardo da Vinci, and for more reasons than just his genius in other areas. I actually really like his paintings. But one of the things that struck me in studying his life was a quote he has where he says, those who build temples to the Lord tend to use them more for Mary or for the mother than the son, right? That's a quote from his. And I thought to myself, well, that was decidedly Protestant, it sounded like to me, right? And I went and sort of looked into some of the other guys around this time, like Leon Alberti Battista and Michelangelo, Michelangelo's a little bit closer to the Protestant Reformation, but nonetheless, and yeah, it's very true. The Renaissance has a lot. I mean, Jan Hus, 100 years before Martin Luther, was saying basically the exact same things, to the extent that Luther was even able to say in court, I am a Hussite, which I don't think he was 100% right about that. But, I think he was going more for shock value anyways. But the point just kind of being that there's a undercurrent that I would say even goes all the way back to the Ante-Nicene Church Fathers in a way, because like there's so many divergent views in the Ante-Nicene Church Fathers that it seems like they all kind of, and by the way, this even extends to greater than Protestantism, I think. I don't know that we've had a new theological doctrine probably since the Ante-Nicene Fathers. Whether that be Pentecostalism or Sabbatarianism or modalism or whatever it is, right? They're like, that's all found either in what they said or in people they responded to. And it just gets kind of like doctored all throughout the ages in ways that creates these new little contexts that, obviously have other additions and different formulations of the same thought and so on and so forth. And you really can't separate anything from its heritage. I think it's not possible.
Well, yeah, as I said, like, because here's the thing: Protestantism itself comes from Catholicism, and so, like I said, it's as much as people want to say, like, it's very hard to separate Protestantism also from its Catholic moorings, and yet it has also distanced itself enough away from them to kind of make its own identity, you could say. And so when you look at people like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, yeah, they have they have a lot of understandings that Protestants would later use in their revolt or reformation, however you call it. But again, these understandings, they're also things that Catholics in their day have noticed as much as Protestants had in theirs. So, like, what I mean to say, CJ, and I don't think you're doing this, but I think like this mistake can easily be made, that someone could look at someone like Michelangelo or the Ante-Nicene Fathers or Da Vinci and just come to the conclusion that the Reformation essentially started in the Renaissance. No, it didn't. It clearly didn't. Now, obviously, the Renaissance preceded the Reformation, hence a lot of material was borrowed. But how to put it? To say that the Protestant Reformation started in England, or sorry, to say that the Protestant Reformation started in the Renaissance is a lot like saying the United States began with the 13 colonies. It didn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely do see what you mean.
Okay. Wildheart wants us to see something. Okay.
No, it's not. It's not for now. It's just I've started doing Hangouts on Google Meet. The like of it's just whenever I'm not on YouTube, I just go in there and I want everyone to get bored and
Okay.
chat like it's not for no particular.
So if you could have your way with history, what would you say the Protestant Reformation shouldn't have happened?
Theologically, yes, I would, but at the same time, I can't put all the blame on the Reformation or the Reformers because ultimately they are a product of the moral scandal that the church at the time was allowing to take place.
Actually, I appreciate that answer. It was a little bit. I don't know. I'll just be honest. It was just better than I was expecting.
What were you expecting, CJ?
Well, I have been unfortunately, around enough of these polemic type debates for, to see enough. And by the way, I'm not tooting my horn in a sense, right? That's obviously I'm still pretty young, but my point is just to say that, some of the stuff you'll hear defending what the Reformation was initially against is disheartening, to say the least. It kind of it makes you think of people and groups as in ways that maybe you shouldn't. You guys are just going to follow blindly, whatever. Because I've always thought that what was initially responded to in the 95 Theses was so obviously church corruption that it shouldn't really have caused anything. And the only reason it did cause anything is because that corruption, unfortunately, went all the way up to the top. Yeah, exactly. Right. But some people, because they don't like to admit the idea that, well, I mean, the guy who renovated St. Peter's Basilica couldn't have done so through corrupt means. That's not possible. And so they just come up with these wild polemics, like Urban is some kind of saint, you know what I mean? And it's he totally wasn't, though. And the thing is, too, is even worse on those guys on the ground. Can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but the guy who said, every time the bell rings, a soul from purgatory sings, or springs rather.
As far as I understand, that itself is quite anachronistic. That a catchphrase was not contemporary during the time. However, that practice was in effect. I'm not going to deny that.
Yeah, and there's a particular guy, when anachronistically or not, I guess I'm not sure, but I know that quote is it's associated with a particular German guy.
The quote is accurate. Don't get me wrong. It just is. It is not contemporary with the. It's not contemporary with the formation of the. It's not contemporary with the events of the initial Reformation.
For sure. I can't remember this dude's name. He was literally the catalyst for Martin Luther writing the 95 Theses in the first place, because he came over to Saxony Wittenberg. Saxony is where Martin Luther was originally from. And Martin Luther was tired of him fleecing his flock. I can't remember now, but it's at any rate, the point just being, to get back to what I was trying to say, so I don't get taken off on this name I can't remember. It's disheartening that so many people have been willing to defend that era rather than just kind of concluding that, kind of like you did. I mean, obviously we're going to disagree on the theological thing. I expect that. But at least the bare minimum of what Martin Luther initially saw, I feel like should be granted. And I think it's good that it was.
Absolutely. Here's the thing, CJ. Maybe you probably don't know this about me, but I'm not against doing debates, but I am not a debater. I am not. I am not here to kind of. I am not here to be a sycophant of the church or defend her. Like when God's people are in the wrong, they are clearly in the wrong. I'm not going to pussyfoot or sugarcoat any of that. Rather, what I'm doing with my platform, what I want to do with the Pale Galilean, as I have always said, is simply to teach Catholicism, warts and all. Okay, and again, that's why I take the positions I do. Like in February 19th, I'm going to be defending that the Inquisitions were actually quite an ethical alternative to what were actually quite ethical for their time, as opposed to what was believed after, especially mid the 17th century. I'm not taking this position because it's a comfortable one to take. I'm not taking this position because it's a hot take. I'm taking the position because I intend to teach Catholicism, and I intend to teach it all with all of its beauty and all of its warts. And one of the histories of the church is specifically during its inquisitional processes of courts, right? I'm again, I'm when how do I want to say? If I'm going to teach the church, if I'm going to teach Catholicism, this is an issue that needs to be expounded upon. And while we would consider the Inquisitions a moral evil today, especially in our context, back in the day, in the Middle Ages, what the Inquisitions were was actually quite an ethical alternative to the secular courts and how they understood and perceived justice and law. And so, what's up, Wildheart?
I just wanted to fight back against that a bit. I mean, what's less moral than like torturing and killing people for not believing?
That's the thing, Wildheart. You're kind of demonstrating what I mean. There is a lot of misinformation brought on from from Protestant monarchs, oftentimes in the light of the Reformation, right? What was going on is that there needed to be quite a bit of they needed people to rally behind them, and they did this in the form of what we would call propaganda today. And so what's going on is there's this understanding, and unfortunately it's still quite widespread, that millions of people died in the Inquisitions, right? That they were kind of tried, executed by the Inquisitions, by priests in black robes, and all that. But the issue is that from the advent of the Inquisition in the 13th century to the death of the last Inquisition in the 19th century, millions of people weren't even born during this time, because what you'll often find, you will find kind of numbers skyrocket, like anywhere from like 10 to 80 million people, right? Like again, this amount of people weren't even born during this time. The vast majority of the people that were born in human civilization have been in the last 200 years. So
yeah, I'm not really criticizing the numbers.
Exactly. So,
but do you agree that people were tortured and?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, like I'm not going to deny that part. But what?
Well, so real briefly though, can I do want to just clarify something, because
go ahead. I think I went off on a ramble. Go ahead.
No, you're totally fine. Now, admittedly, this misconception does come from my side. I will freely grant that, because the saying is 68 million killed in the Inquisition, and that is
impossible.
It's obviously preposterous. Yeah, it doesn't even make sense. But it's important to note that what that claim originally came from is actually significantly more true, which is the same number, 68 million, in the period that is considered the dominant era of church and state in Europe, which starts anywhere from 325 to 606, depending on which list you're starting with. 606 because that's when papal infallibility starts to become not dogmatic by any stretch, but Pope Boniface III is starting to say it, and it's starting to become an idea that people are taking seriously. 325, obviously, the Council of Nicaea. And so that original claim, which I believe is found in Fox's Book of Martyrs, is significantly different than what people did with that claim. And that is because obviously now you're talking about a period of anywhere from 900 to 1200 years. It includes the Inquisition, but it also includes Crusades, and also includes what happened to the Cathars, which aren't even Christians, right? But it's not necessarily the point.
Well, and again, I wouldn't say that necessarily, because oftentimes when it comes to the Crusades, like for the Albigensian Crusade, like you mentioned, these deaths are attributed to war, right? Again, like war kills an absurdly a large amount of people, and the majority often aren't just the combatants, because what war does. It interrupts supply lines. Food doesn't get delivered to cities. You burn and salt farms. Like just by how war is waged, many people are going to just die anyway. That's oftentimes why you find these refugees displaced, because their own lands are like you can't live there anymore. Everything's gone, and so that's why you get war refugees. And so, but to when the Inquisition is painted, it's often painted as a latent threat that just let look for and killed an absurdly amount of people, kind of like war did. That's not how it worked, right? Like when it came to the Inquisitions, like altogether from the advent of the First Inquisition, which was the Albigensian Inquisition in the 13th century, to the death of the Spanish Inquisition, which was the last one in the 19th century. Maybe 30,000 throughout these 800 years were executed. That's it. If like through 800 years, maybe 30,000, all things considered, right? For instance, the Spanish Inquisition itself, like the Roman Inquisition, is responsible for about 3,000. That's the scholarly consensus. Some people will go as far to say it is 30,000 to try to account for lost records, but even that is a very what's the word? That is a very minority position in scholarship, even. So even like whatever evils the Inquisitions are responsible for, they are often so drastically exaggerated to the point of fiction. Would you agree with that, CJ?
Well, it's like I said, it's one of those things where the original literature that had claimed these kinds of things was accounting for much more than simply the Inquisitions. And so I do, while I want to grant what you're saying, I do also want to point out that there is kind of I don't know if this would even be something that would come up in the particular debate, right? But the point was just kind of that it was meant to include, I think, a little bit more originally than what your typical fundamentalist Baptist actually ended up running with it. Now, one thing I will say, though, is interestingly enough, when it comes to numbers in the Spanish Inquisition, a good deal of the more outlandish claims actually come from the inquisitors themselves. For example, I can't remember his name. It's like Thomas something, I think. But the head inquisitor in Spain has a quote where he says something along the lines of like 250,000, which scholars have universally rejected.
Yes, yes.
But it's interesting that it comes from him originally, right? And it's almost like so it seems like the propaganda does kind of go both ways, and you can see why that would be too.
Yeah. Now, I want to make this clear: the amount of people that were prosecuted by the Spanish Inquisition are quite numerous. Like we have records up to the tens of thousands of people prosecuted. However, the people that were actually executed or exiled or had like an awful punishment put upon them, those are they are a minority of a minority. Like of the people that were executed, right? They themselves are a vast minority of the people convicted. And so that needs to be understood too. In fact, the Roman Inquisition or the Medieval Inquisition, which kind of presided over kind of like the what we would now know today as the Balkan states, Italy, and parts of Germany, that based itself on the norms and on the predicative norms of the Spanish Inquisition, and they have very much the same numbers. So ultimately, like these Inquisitions themselves, they were very, very, the evils, whatever evils they're guilty of is clearly exaggerated. But moreover, something else that needs to be understood too is the fact, like the understanding that the Inquisitions is something unethical, right, is uniquely a modernist understanding. Specifically, no one was saying that the Inquisitions were unethical until really the 19th century. because when the Inquisitions were in their heyday, when they were being actively put in place, like Protestant monarchs had their own inquisitions, although it was under a different name. It served the same function to kind of root out the theologies and religions that were antithetical to the good of the Christian state, and that's exactly what they would do. Especially when you go to into Elizabeth's England, that was true for every Catholic they found was considered guilty of treason, and every Catholic priest was sentenced to death almost immediately without trial. And if they did get a trial, it was obviously measured against them. And so what's going on is that, like, in fact, I challenge you to even go look up Fox's Book of Martyrs. The understanding that this
That's what I have here.
Hold on, Jamie. But the understanding that burning someone to death at the stake for heresy, even Fox does not look at this as immoral. Rather, it's kind of how it's framed. It isn't immoral to burn someone at the stake for heresy. It's immoral for burning Protestants at the stake for heresy. And again, it's evidently clear, because just like 15 years before the publication of Fox's Book of Martyrs, there was like 1,500 Jewish false conversos that were also put to the pyre. And what had happened is that, well, they don't even earn themselves an entry in Fox's book. So it's so really, even in when the Protestant Reformation was at its height, they did not morally object to the practice. They morally objected to them being the subject of the practice.
Yeah.
So now here's an interesting thing that I think, though, that does need to be noted, because that's true, right? And Martin Luther is the best example of that ever, right? With what he did to the Anabaptists and the Jews and the blah, 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 right? But also Calvin with Servetus, and John Smith obviously had very political Christianity in Scotland. I mean, the Church of England is literally headed by the king. But it is important to note that these ideas we had that you talk about that are modernist, right? They do come, even if they come a very long time after, a couple hundred years, they come out of the Protestant Reformation, most certainly, right? John Locke was a Protestant, and Adam Smith was a Protestant, and Edmund Burke was a Protestant. You know what I mean? Like, and this is why I attribute it all to Martin Luther in a particular sense, which is that I think he lit he had no control over where the fire was going. But the fire that he lit is a fire that I'm very glad was lit, because the ultimate conclusion, I think, of Martin Luther was what ended up happening in specifically Britain and the United States, and then the countries that derived from Britain as well. And it took a while to get there, for sure. In fact, Britain's a good example of it taking a while to get there, because Britain kind of got there after the United States, interestingly enough. Excuse me, considering the fact that Britain is like 800 years older than the United States. But regardless, that is, I think, a very Protestant sort of thing to look at religion as something that is separated from the realm of government, and look at punishing people for things like heresy and blasphemy and things like that as well, I wouldn't say they necessarily thought about it as barbaric at first, but I guess that's what we kind of consider it to be today, right? Now, this is not 100% true for all people, to be fair. There's a turn specifically in Reformed circles, which kind of bothers me personally, because I am a Reformed person. But there is a turn of people to like go back to this sort of what would you call that? Separation of not separation of church and state kind of thing, right? And I definitely don't approve of that, but like Douglas Wilson has been kind of saying that kind of stuff. And
well, the thing about it, so let me kind of respond to that. One thing I want to say here is that actually just what I am saying, what I've kind of been illustrating to you, has been part of historic Christianity for like thousands of years. For instance, even Augustine, right? He actually praised the emperor of his time for putting his thumb and persecuting the
Okay.
For persecuting the Domitians.
Okay.
Here, you might want to mute yourself, CJ. You're kind of roboting a bit.
Hey, I gotta jump out real quick.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, anyway, so as I will say, this is very ancient, very historical in Christianity, because even in Augustine's day, he
what is though? What is?
hold on. So even in Augustine's day, when Augustine was writing, he was praising actually the emperor for persecuting the Donatists because they were having a major impact and influence in and around his geographical region, kind of converting people to more or less their cause. And that was a problem to him. And so once the emperor kind of came down, persecuted and exiled a good many, that was actually something that he praised as an open good. Even later on in the 6th century, under Emperor Justinian, he exiled entire populations of the Chaldeans into Arabia. And what the Chaldeans were, they were a Gnostic Christian sect that believed the Virgin Mary should be part of the Godhead, and so they were persecuted too. And if they resisted exile, no doubt death would have been dealt, because, well, that is the order. That's the order of the state. That's the order of the emperor. So really, what we see in the Inquisitions is nothing really barbaric. It's just a genuine Christian ancient understanding that Christianity as a civilization has a right to defend itself. And even in the 16th century, during the Reformations, they believed in the same thing. That's why in Elizabethan England they killed a priest wherever they could find him, and they looked at Catholics as traitors and would either execute or exile them too, because from the Protestant perspective, they are defending themselves. They're defending Christian civilization. From the Catholic perspective, we're defending Christian civilization. And so, as I said, I'm not actually opposed to people being put on trial for like a heresy, blasphemy, or things like that. Because when you have a Christian community and it is a Christian civilization that you have, then you have a right to defend it. Because if you simply allow it to be stepped on at every given moment and possibility, you don't keep your civilization for very long. And this is the understanding that behind the Reformation. And even the Inquisition itself actually was quite a moral and ethical alternative to what was there. And as Bob rightly points out in the chat, the Inquisitions were humanitarian. And the reason they were is because the secular courts were far more barbarous. For instance, what the Inquisition was in the 13th century, when we first came out, when we used the Inquisitions against the Cathars, against the Albigensians, what that actually was the very first application of evidential prosecution in the medieval world. Because, as I said, being prosecuted for heresy was nothing new in the medieval world. Only before the Inquisitions came along, it was secular courts prosecuting you, not ecclesiastical ones. And this is important because secular courts were notoriously barbaric. For instance, I don't think Wildheart doesn't understand this, so let me kind of elucidate.
Yeah, no, it's the first issue I don't understand a lot.
Okay, so yes, So let me say something real quick. So basically, when you were in a secular court in the medieval ages, if you were prosecuted, right, you basically said that you gave the best reason for your defense. The prosecutor gave the best reason for your guilt, and the judge decided who was right. That's basically in a nutshell. That's what's going on, because the judge would decide whether or not you were guilty or innocent based on your testimony and the prosecutor's testimony. The one that convinced him more is the one he sided with. Now, you could appeal that in two ways. You could appeal this sentencing and be found innocent through a trial of ordeal, and that basically meant you would go through a time allotted of going through a torturous method. For instance, you might be forced to hold your breath in a river for 5 minutes and possibly die, or you might be roasted over hot coals for a couple minutes, or in other trials such as this, trials that actually tested your endurance. Because if you were the understanding was that if you were innocent, you will claim that innocence to your dying breath. Yeah. And the other way that you could do it is by bringing someone of good repute from the community to vouch on behalf of your innocence. Aside from those two things, those were the only ways you could appeal your conviction.
Wait,
However-
wait.
And
before-
hold on, Jamie. Let me finish my point. Then I'll let you guys respond. The Inquisitions, on the other hand, they were established based on Roman pagan law that was found in the University of Bologna, and that's what contributed to the Code of Canon Law, of the Catholic Church. So in the Inquisitions were based on this discovery of ancient Roman jurisprudence.
Yeah.
And so when the Inquisitions came to town, they could not prosecute you without some semblance of evidence. They couldn't do it. And that's the difference. With secular courts, they could prosecute you for anything and find you guilty of anything. But with ecclesiastical courts and Inquisition courts, they had to go out of their way and look for evidence. And if they couldn't find it, they had no case. You were safe from them. And that's why any lawyer that was worth a damn in the Middle Ages, they tried their hardest to get your case heard in an ecclesiastical court, because if it was, there's a good chance it would be thrown out almost immediately.
Yeah.
Okay, now I think Wildheart had a question and Jamie had a question. Who's going first?
Yeah, I think the main difference will be in a secular court, you have been tried for just like crimes like stealing things, and I presume. Whereas with the Inquisition, it was like purely based on, what your religious beliefs. I think there's kind of a big difference there.
So what's going on here is that you were tried for crimes say stealing, theft, murder, like bribery, things like that in the medieval times. However, ecclesiastical courts could also try you on those crimes also, provided there was a religious connotation in it. For instance, if one of your crimes was either heresy or blasphemy, that immediately got you into an ecclesiastical court, no matter what other crimes might be leveled against you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what I said. Say you stole something, right? The first thing your lawyer wants to do is kind of frame your case in a way that says, well, he stole something, Your Honor, but he also committed blasphemy. By doing that, you immediately get your case moved into a different court. Anyway, I think Jamie had a question too. What's up, Jamie?
Yeah.
Well, I know Cheryl. Jamie gets to talk now. What's up, Jamie?
Oh, I was just gonna. No, that's fine. I'm letting you guys talk. I was just gonna say. I think if you're gonna make the and I don't necessarily disagree, but if you're gonna make the claim that the Inquisitions were essentially a product of their time, or even an advancement of moral position or whatever, how does that affect the argument that Christianity is supposed to be this moral? I mean, can you still make the claim that Christianity is like the undergirding of the advancement of how we do things in our culture, the West?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because the Inquisitions themselves, they came out as a way of a new understanding of human and civil rights. Because what's going on is that when the Roman canon law was when the pagan law was found in Bologna, everybody, every lawyer, every Christian lawyer from all over the continent of Europe flocked to Bologna to study them. And the reason being is because they offered an answer to a tantalizing problem that Christianity has been facing. When you look on Christian society, you see that the rich and powerful clearly have rights and rights to do things. Because again, it is the generals that move their armies and march and take what they want. They take property, they take land, and often use it for themselves. Oftentimes, the rich are the people that decide the fate and future of economies. So theologians and lawyers were asking, okay, what rights does the common man have who isn't rich and who isn't powerful? And ultimately, when they found the pagan Roman jurisprudence, this offered the answer, because although this was pagan law, they were able to look at it from a thoroughly Christian lens. And that what they found out then is that, okay, so the rich and powerful, by means of being rich and powerful, have a quality that the weak and poor have a right to. And they essentially used Roman jurisprudence as a way of establishing what those rights are, what those qualities that the rich, that the poor and the weak had a right to. And so the Inquisitions themselves were predicated on the understanding that humans had rights, that everybody, that the common man had rights. That's why that Inquisition courts wouldn't just let secular courts have their way with them, right? And wouldn't let the people have their way with the defendants. That instead you had to meet the standards of you had to meet the standards of the civil and human rights that the Code of Canon Law and the Inquisition had established. And even in republics at that time, for instance, in the Republic of Verona and Venice, because both of these were republics, right? The Inquisition was held entirely in secular courts, because in Venice, just as much as you could be in, say, Spain, you could be tried and prosecuted and convicted on heresy and blasphemy. The difference is that like in Venice, right, they had an expectation of rights in the first place, because when you are a citizen of a republic, you have rights already. And so the secular courts the Inquisition was controlled entirely by secular courts in those republics. However, in monarchies, in things like Germany, Italy, or not Italy then, but the Papal States, and Spain, and a lot of these secular states, a lot of these monarchies, right? They don't have a conception like their citizens have rights. They don't have that. So that needed to be introduced by the Inquisition. And then when monarchism collapsed, right, the ecclesiastical inquisitional courts simply the ecclesiastical inquisition courts simply absorbed this into the secular law. When those courts collapsed, the secular courts just grabbed up those understandings. And Cheryl is asking for references. Right now, an alarm is going off, which means I got to do something. I will be right back. And when I come back, I'll give you those references, Cheryl, okay?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me, because I'm just going to pose some questions for you. I want to know if...
listen, Jamie, I got to do something
no
right
problem.
now. Just pose those questions when I get back, okay?
All right. Because I want to know, like, when Rome takes over the, or when the church takes over Rome, should that have even happened in the first place, and had a central power, for where the Pope takes over the emperorship of Rome? It seems to me that should have never happened. I would say the separation of church and state is one of the most advanced ideas that ever happened in America, and that's a necessary thing. And I know some Christians disagree with that, but I would say that has to be the case.
Yeah, I wish we had it over here. Yeah, we got Henry VIII making his own basically religion up because he wants to get divorced. Yeah, I'd much prefer your way, to be honest.
Well, I mean, in England, it's not that way, I guess, technically, but it really is ultimately, isn't it?
Okay, yeah. I'm back. What's up?
Okay, so do you think it was good that, I would presume you have to say yes, but it seems to me that it never should have happened that the church took over central power from the Roman emperor. What would you say to that?
No, that actually was good, because Wildheart knows, as I was explaining it to him, but in ancient times, today, the Pontifex Maximus, literally Latin for the highest priest, today that's the Pope. But in ancient times, it was the Roman emperor that was the Pontifex Maximus. Right. It's no coincidence that the highest political office of the land was simultaneously the highest religious one. Like, you talk about the papacy being somewhat of you think it might have been a threat to secularism, but no, the papacy rather introduced secularism to that region, because the idea that there is a distinction between the realms of church and state, between the holy and the profane, between the realm of mortals and the realm of the divines, that is introduced due to Christianity. So rather, it is papal power that introduced secularism to Rome in the first place.
So are you saying that, so you would disagree that the Roman hierarchy wanted, the Roman Catholic Church wanted to have unite the two then?
Absolutely. The understanding that the church and state were united in Christianity at any point in time is merely an Enlightenment myth. All right, it's one parroted by, but it's still a stupid understanding of history. And a very ignorant one at that. Anyway, Cheryl wanted references. So there are two that I have. One is a history of medieval heresy and Inquisition by Dr. Jennifer Kolkoff Dean, and the other is actually Dominion by Tom Holland. One is more clearly in the category of scholarship than the other, Cheryl, and Dominion's easier to get a hold of than Dr. Dean's work. So I would recommend starting with Dominion and reading the section where he's talking about and read the section when he's going over the medieval church, especially the discovery of canon law at Bologna. That's what I would start with. After that, and if you can get a hold of it, I would highly recommend Dr. Dean's work. It's a very illuminating on the subject.
Okay. Let me probe you a few other questions. Like I'm just kind of thinking off the cuff here. So in the book of Daniel, it talks about this Antichrist figure who seeks to change times and laws. So how would you understand that historically? Or do you think that's a future event, or do you think this person should be applied to like pagan Rome maybe? Or I'm not sure what your position is.
Well, Christians traditionally have had this understanding of prophecy, that there is a nearer context and a remoter context. So when Daniel was talking about someone who would want to change times and seasons and worship, right? That literally happened in Babylon, because what had happened is the Babylonians destroyed the temple. What they would use to determine times, seasons, and worship for their worship was literally gone now, and it was destroyed. Later on, this prophecy would be fulfilled again by the Greek Grecian powers, because when Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, Judah came with it, and when he died, one of his generals, what was it, Pompey, I think? No, what were their names? I forget.
Are you talking about under Alexander? Or?
No, it was after Alexander. One of the generals he left it under. What was their names?
I can look it up.
I forget what it was, but anyway, so the Greek power at the time had rule over Judah, and at some point the king of that kingdom literally went into the temple and completely abolished the worship of Yahweh. And
that's Antiochus, right?
Antiochus, exactly. And so Antiochus completely abolished the worship of Yahweh, but also dedicated the Yahweh's temple to pagan gods and to Zeus, and would even sacrifice a pig on the altar. And so so what's going on is you see that context being fulfilled again. Then Rome also destroys the temple, just like the Babylonians had before, and so that also was the change of time, seasons, and worship. And now later on, right, when John is writing and kind of mirroring Daniel, what he's saying is that there is one more fulfillment of this prophecy yet to come. And what I would argue is that when John is writing this, that this is going to happen, the character in his mind that fulfills this is Rome. And so, in my humble opinion, the character to fulfill this, to change time, seasons, and worship again, is going to be a Roman-like state. It's not going to be a Christian state. It's not going to be a Christian state with a Christian secularism. Rather, what's going to happen, it's going to be a state that is going to understand religion and the state the way Rome did. And the closest we had to that in the modern day was Nazi Germany. And Nazi Germany, I would say to a lesser degree, Bolshevik communism. But now both of those powers collapsed. And I'm not saying they couldn't return, but what I'm saying is whatever is going to fulfill the prophecy that John has in Revelation, it's well outside of our sight for now.
That's interesting. I think it seems to me that it's hard to imagine. There's not a lot of candidates really that are like even you could say are available at least now. So I would imagine it'd have to be something new, right? You would think because
Well, yeah, because of the closest thing to the Roman Empire that has ever come out from the West is Nazi Germany, because Christianity is predicated on two understandings: that there is no Jew and Greek, that all people share a certain equality, and that the weak and poor have value. These two principles were thoroughly and profoundly rejected by German nationalism, profoundly rejected, like because when because Adolf Hitler already writes about the liquidation of minorities in Germany long before he became chancellor, and when he does, he frames it under evolutionary theory, that what he's doing by killing these people, by liquidating these populations, he doesn't see it as murder as much as he sees it as an obligation, as much as he sees it as defense, because the less of the inferiors going around, the longer the superiors last. That it is essentially your right as being superior to these people, due to your power as being superior to these people, you have the obligation to remove them. And that is the Roman understanding, because Rome, just like Nazi Germany, did not recognize that there was any value at all in the poor and the weak. And they would have said, no, there is a Jew and there is a Greek, and the Greeks are better, right? And that's why when Julius Caesar went off to war, Julius Caesar was paraded and even deified for slaughtering 2 million people that were non-combatants. He was known for having gone off into Gaul, slaughtering 1 million and enslaving another million, and the numbers could easily be much higher. But so essentially, Julius Caesar essentially committed genocide, and he was applauded for it. And that's because that the Roman understanding of the world is very, very scary. And the closest thing the West has ever produced to something like that is Nazi Germany. That's why that people have more against Nazism than Bolshevik communism. Even though Bolshevik communism has a higher body count, it is operating on these Christian assumptions that the weak and poor have value, and that that the weak and poor have value. Even its slander of the rich has thoroughly Christian roots. And so what's going on, that when we look at Bolshevik communism, we see more of our reflection than we do when we look at Nazism. And that's the thing, because Nazism was the closest thing Rome ever came to being resurrected. And
more every day, it seems that.
And thankfully we put down, and again, that's what kind of scares me about Freedom from Religion Foundation. That's what scares me about today's modern atheists. And that's what even scares me to a lesser degree about Bolshevik communism.
About the left.
Because what's going on is that when you look at modern day atheists, what they clearly want, they want religious affiliations, Muslims, Jews, Christians. They want these religious understandings to be subservient to the state. That it's cool they exist, but ultimately they are under the authority of the state. And again, this is religion the way Rome understood, and that's the erosion of secularism. When you erode secularism, you take a big step to approaching Roman power, and that will be a very scary world.
You don't think that the Catholic Church tries to make those kinds of connections with different groups too?
What do you mean?
Like consolidation under the Pope?
Well, yeah. Again, we papal power and Christian power have been consolidated. True. However, that being said, how would I put it? Oftentimes, and you can even see this in Spain, the exile of religious groups is nothing new in Christianity. The difference, however, is basically making the government and the religion one and the same, or one having direct authority over another. For instance, the King of Spain could never tell the Pope how to run the church, and the Pope, in the meanwhile, could not tell Spain how to run their empire. Okay, this understanding is instrumental, and and is part of the ingredients that made Christianity so powerful and so identifiable. Rome didn't have this because, again, the highest priest in the Roman Empire was the emperor, and so he got to just decide all things, both in the secular governments and theologically. And so, like, when I look at today's atheists and like Freedom from Religion Foundation as the preeminent example, they are approaching power. They are approaching an understanding of political and religious power the way the Roman Empire had understood it. And that's what makes them, and that's why I do not consider them secularists. I do not consider Western atheists that reject a religious, that reject the authority of, that reject ecclesiastical authority. I don't consider them secularists. They are statists. They understand power the way Rome did.
So do you imagine the prophecies like where it says, the leader of this group of the Antichrist or whatever, the beast power will call himself God or whatever? You would imagine it to be a secular power coming in and stepping on the church then.
Yeah, the beast of Revelation, the entity that comes to take power is not going to be coming from a Christian seedbed. It's going to be coming from a Roman one. It's going to be cut from the same stock that Hitler's Germany was.
But not literally Rome, but
obviously not literally Rome, but like they will be Roman in everything except name.
So it's when it says it's Rome, it means everything but actual Rome.
When it says it's Rome, it will understand politics the way Rome did. It will understand religion the way Rome did, finance the way Rome did. It's going to because here's the thing: when Hitler founded the Third Reich, he did found it on the understanding of the way that historically Rome operated. Like, there's a reason he identified his empire with like the eagle. That's because Rome did also. There's a reason, like many concepts that he introduced into his Reich were present in Rome, and so in fact he went on. He actually had said in writing that he wanted to create a Third Reich that would last 1,000 years. That's roughly the length that Rome lasted as a civilization. And so like Hitler wore his Roman inspirations high and proudly on his sleeve, and that's.
Well, I mean, lots of Christians, I think Catholics and Protestants, many of them were surprisingly cozy. Seems like with the Third Reich, weren't they?
Although I can just make a bad joke, he also wore God with us on the belt buckles as well.
Yeah. No doubt. Like, and this is the thing. Like, the Roman Empire had no problem co-opting religion as a way of as a way of forwarding his own agenda, and Hitler is doing the same. But what's going on, right? What's going on is that the people weren't exactly cozy with the Third Reich. For instance, the Pope himself wanted to speak out against the Third Reich, but he was deathly afraid of because the Pope was aware of the kind of man Hitler was, and he was afraid of what that kind of man was capable of, and so many times the Pope's refusal and the Pope's campaign against the Chancellor there was actually covert. For instance, the Pope established a pipeline in Nazi Germany that saved over 500,000 people from the death camps, and later on, like even people that were equally fascist, because Benito Mussolini was equally fascist as Hitler was. The difference is that unlike Hitler, Mussolini did not reject those Christian understandings. He didn't reject those principles of Christianity. In fact, in 1943, I believe, Hitler demanded that Mussolini surrender his Jews to his death camps, and Mussolini said no and absolutely refused to submit to Hitler on this. Even though, militaristically speaking, Hitler had a advantage over fascist Italy. The reason being is because Mussolini, unlike Hitler, had not rejected the teachings of the Pale Galilean like Hitler had. And so that's why Mussolini oftentimes is not nearly as excoriated in the history books as Hitler is. And even though Mussolini died to mob rule, he nonetheless has a certain heroism that Hitler never had, even though they're both fascists.
Yeah. I would just point out, though, that the first, is it Concordant that Hitler signed was with the Catholic Church, to like the Catholic Church teach in German schools.
Oh, yeah,
Catholicism. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That was basically kind of a peace treaty between the church and Nazi Germany. And Nazi Germany broke that multiple times.
Yeah.
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 Well, I'm gonna shut down because it's late. You guys want to have say last words? I'm gonna think some better questions for you next time and think about what you said and come. We can talk next time. And I'll be more prepared to engage you a little bit, Fro. But I thank you for coming.
Hey, listen, it's good because also the randomness of these conversations, just what they can produce itself, is very efficacious. But listen, like in the next, I just received in the mail yesterday the Glories of Mary by Alphonsus Liguori, so I might be recording a couple readings on that for the audience to see. So if you ever want to appear on that stream, you definitely can. Just stay posted for the next few days.
I'm going to say, if you can post your link, I just want to make sure I'm subbed Pergal into your channel.
Yeah.
You can post the link.
Anybody can. You guys want to say anything else about your channel? That's cool too. Yeah, and that'd be fun. I definitely want to. I have wanted to for a long time. Talk to you some more and on other topics too. I just anyways,
here, I'm gonna put my channel link in the private chat, so like so Wildheart could subscribe should he choose.
Sure.
Thank you very much. I shall do so if I'm not already. And thanks, Jamie, for letting me on. It's been good.
Anytime, man. Yeah, it was fun. It was very informative.
And before you shut down, I'm also going to put it in the public chat. So so I think Jan's already subscribed to me, but now Cheryl can because she seems to have a lot in common with Bob. So I know she'll like the content I produce.
You might get three or four subscriptions off me as well.
I'm sorry. What's up, Wildheart?
You might get about 3 or 4 subscriptions off me because I have several different accounts. Like for when
hey, that's right.
decide to randomly delete one of my channels. Like,
hey, no, that's fine. The more the merrier.
Cool.
I think you're both. We are both interested in Jordan Peterson type stuff too, and there's a lot I could say about that. I think it might be fun conversations, but let's. I'll be in touch, and yeah, come in anytime, guys. And good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. I appreciate you watching and hanging out, and have a good one. See you soon.
Cheers. Thanks everyone on side chat as well.
Yep.
Right.
Viva Cristo Rey. Pray the rosary.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
See ya. Thank you for having me on, Jamie. It's been a pleasure.